Chapter 1, Scholar Meng Hao. The state of Zhao was a very small nation. 1. The state of Zhao is named after the historical state of Zhao. Like other small nations in the lands of South Heaven, its people admired the Great Tang. 2. The Great Tang is named after the historical Tang dynasty in the eastern lands, and they admired Chang'an. 3. Chang'an is named after the historical Chinese city Chang'an. Not only did the king carry this admiration, all scholars in the state of Zhao did. They could see it, almost as if they stood atop the tower of Tang in the capital city, oh so far away. This April was neither extremely cold, nor scorching hot. Light winds caressed the land, passing the Zhongdi flutes of the northern reaches, blowing over the lands of the Great Tang. Under the twilight sky, it lifted the fog-like dust, then swirling, twisting, reached Mount Daking in the state of Zhao. Then it fell onto a young man who sat there on the mountaintop. He was a lean young man, holding a bottle gourd and wearing a clean blue scholar's robe. He appeared to be about 16 or 17. He was not tall, and his skin was somewhat dark, but his bright eyes sparkled with intelligence. And yet, all his intelligence seemed to be hidden by the frown on his face. He seemed lost. Failed again, he sighed. His name was Meng Hao, an average student from Yunjia County, which lay at the foot of the mountain. 4. Meng Hao's name in Chinese is Meng Hao. Meng is a family name. Hao means great or many. Years ago, his parents went missing, and did not leave much behind in the way of assets. Education was expensive, so he was almost completely broke. I've taken the imperial exams 3 years in a row. In all that time, I read books written by the sages until I wanted to throw up. Maybe that isn't the path for me after all. Filled with self-deprecation, he looked down at the good bottle, his eyes bleak. My dream of becoming an official and getting rich just keeps getting farther and farther away. I might as well forget about trying to reach the Great Tang. How useless to be a student. He laughed bitterly. Sitting there on the silent mountaintop, gazing at the bottle gourd in his hand, he looked increasingly lost. He began to feel fear. What would he do in the future? Where would he go? Perhaps a high-ranking official would take an interest in him, or a beautiful young maiden. Or would he continue to take the exams, year after year? There were no answers to the questions. He was but a teenager, and this feeling of being lost had devoured him like a giant invisible mouth. He truly felt afraid. Even the teachers in town can only make a few pieces of silver. That's worse than Uncle Wang's carpenter shop. If I'd realized that earlier, I could have learned some carpentry skills from him. At least then I wouldn't be starving like I am now. He grew silent for a while. I don't have much food or money left at home. I owe Steward Jew 3 pieces of silver. What am I going to do? He raised his head and looked up at the sky, blue and grand. It was so large you could not see its ends. Much similar to how he could not see his future. After a while, Meng Hao shook his head and took out a slip of paper from his robe. He read it carefully, placed it in the gourd bottle, then stood up and threw the gourd down the mountain. At the bottom of the mountain was a wide river which never froze during the winter, and was said to flow all the way to the Great Tang. Meng Hao stood on top of the mountain, watching the gourd bottle drift further and further along down the river. He stared unblinking. For a moment, he seemed to have glimpsed his mother, and the happiness of his childhood. The gourd carried his dreams, his wishes, and his hopes for the future. Perhaps one day someone would pick it up, open it, and read the note. Regardless of what I do, be it study or work, I will keep on living. This was his personality, intelligent and determined. If he wasn't this way, he would not have been able to survive after his parents left. He raised his head toward the sky, the stubborn look in his eyes growing deeper. He was about to head down the mountain. At that exact moment, he heard a weak voice coming from a nearby cliff. The sound seemed to be borne along by the wind. As it passed Meng Hao's ears, it was almost too faint to notice. Help, help! Meng Hao stopped for a moment, shocked, then listened carefully. As he concentrated, the sound of the voice calling for help grew stronger. Help! He walked a few steps forward until he had nearly reached the edge of the peak. When he peered over the edge, he saw a person, his body sticking out of a crevice halfway down the cliff. Pale face full of fear and desperation, he cried for help. You're Meng Hao, right? Help, Scholar Meng! Help me! It was a teenager. As soon as he saw Meng Hao, he expressed surprise and happiness, having suddenly found hope in a desperate situation. Wang Youcai, 5. Wang Youcai's name in Chinese is Wang Yucai. Wang is a common family name. Youcai means to have talent or ability. Meng Hao's eyes grew wide as he looked at the young man. He was the son of Uncle Wang, who owned the carpentry shop in town. How did you end up here? Meng Hao looked at the crevice. The cliff itself was quite steep, and it seemed impossible to climb down. The slightest carelessness would send the climber falling into the river. Considering how fast the river flowed, if you fell in, the chances of dying were about 90%. It's not just me, there are other people from nearby towns, Wang Youcai gushed. We're all stuck here. Brother Meng, let's not chat, please, just help us get out. Perhaps he had been hanging out of the crack for too long. His hands grasped at the air, and if not for his compatriots, who grabbed him by the shirt, he would have slipped and fallen down the cliff. His face turned pale with fear. Meng Hao realized the danger. But he had climbed the mountain alone today, and had no rope. How could he save anyone? At that moment, he turned and realized that the mountainside was covered with rattan vines. As frail as he was, it took him 2 hours to find a rattan vine that was long enough. Breathing heavily, he dragged the rattan to the cliff. Calling out Wang's name, he bent over and lowered the rattan down the cliff. You still haven't told me how you got down there, Meng Hao said as he lowered the vine. By flying. It was not Wang Youcai who spoke the words, but another young man who stuck his body out of the crevice next to him. This boy looked feisty and intelligent, and spoke with a loud voice. Bullshit! You can fly, mocked Meng Hao, pulling the rattan vine back up a bit. If you can fly down here, then why don't you fly back up? Don't listen to his nonsense, said Wang Youcai, clearly worried that Meng Hao wouldn't lower the rattan vine back down. We were captured by a flying woman. She said she's going to take us to some sect to be servants. More bullshit, said Meng Hao dismissively. Only immortals from legends can do that. Who believes in that? In books he had read, there were stories of people who became rich after meeting immortals, but it was all just lies. Just as the rattan reached the crevice, Wang caught it. But then, Meng Hao suddenly felt a cold wind behind his back. From the temperature around him, it seemed winter had returned. He shivered. He slowly turned to look back, then screamed and stepped forward into emptiness, beginning to fall off the cliff. He had seen a woman in a long silver robe and pale face, standing there staring at him. It was impossible to tell her age. She was extremely beautiful, but radiated a coldness that made one feel as if she had just crawled out of a grave. Sometimes when you find certain things with certain qualities, it's just fate. When the voice hit his ears, it felt like bones rubbing together. This woman seemed to possess some sort of strange power, and when Meng Hao looked into her eyes, his whole body felt ice cold, as if she could see through him. As if he could hide nothing from her. Her words still floating through the air, she shook her wide sleeve, and suddenly, a gust of greenish wind picked up Meng Hao. He flew down the cliff with her. His mind went blank. When they reached the crevice, the woman waved her hand and threw him inside. As for her, she stopped moving, as did the greenish wind. Wang and his 3 friends scurried backward in fright. The woman stood there, not saying a word. She raised her head and glanced at the rattan vine. Meng Hao was so nervous he had started shaking. He stood up, glancing around quickly. The crevice was not spacious, and was in fact quite narrow. Even with only a few people inside, there was not much room. His eyes fell on Wang and the two other young men. One was the clever fellow, the other one was clean and pudgy. The two of them shivered, looking as if they might cry from fear at any moment. "I was short one person," said the pale-faced woman. Now she looked at Meng Hao instead of the rattan. "I'll put you in with them." "Who are you?" asked Meng Hao, concealing his fear. He was an educated person and had a strong personality. Despite being afraid, he controlled himself and did not panic. The woman said nothing. She raised her right hand and waved, and the green wind appeared again. It lifted up all the young men, and they flew out of the cave together with the woman, shooting up into the sky. They disappeared. Left behind was only Mount Daking. It stood there, straight and tall, merging in the darkness of twilight. The blood drained from Meng Hao's face. He saw himself within the green wind, crossing the sky. As he flew above the ground, wind blew into his mouth, making it impossible to breathe. A word appeared in his head. Immortals? He held his breath for the amount of time it would normally take to breathe 10 times, until he couldn't hold on any more. Then he passed out. When he opened his eyes, he found that they had landed on a platform paved with green stone, halfway up a mountain. More rolling mountains surrounded them. Clouds and fog drifted about. This was definitely not the mortal world. The beautiful peaks of the surrounding mountains looked very strange. Wang and the other young men woke up, scared and shivering. They stared at the back of the woman. Standing in front of her were two cultivators wearing long green robes. They appeared to be in their 20s. They had sunken eyes with fear-inspiring green pupils. "Excellent work, elder Sister Shu," said one of the men, his voice flattering. "You found 4 talented young babies. Take them to the servants' quarter," said the woman, her face cold, not even looking at Meng Hao and the others. Suddenly, her entire body transformed. She became a rainbow and then disappeared into the mountains. By this time, Meng Hao had recovered his composure. He stared, numb, at the place where the woman had disappeared. An expression appeared on his face which had not appeared there for 16 years. His blood boiled. Servants, he thought. If the work is for immortals, the pay must be good. Now that he knew the people didn't want to kill them, he took a step forward. "Sister Shu has reached the 7th level of qi condensation," lamented the second of the cultivators. "The sect priest bestowed a wind pendant upon her, which means even though she isn't at the foundation establishment stage, she can still fly." He looked arrogantly down at Meng Hao and the others. "You and you," he said, pointing at Wang and the clever young man. "Follow me to the southern servants' quarters." "What is this place?" Wang asked, his voice and body both shaking as the immortal pointed at him. "The Reliant Sect." Chapter 2: The Reliant Sect. The Reliant Sect, located within the borders of the state of Jiao, on the southern edge of the lands of South Heaven, was once first among the 4 great sects. Even though it was still famous in the southern domain, it had experienced a decline in recent years and did not maintain the glorious position it once had. Nowadays, compared to the other sects within the state of Jiao, it could only be considered inferior. Actually, it hadn't always been called the Reliant Sect. But 1,000 years ago, a cultivator appeared who caused a great sensation in the southern domain. He'd called himself Patriarch Reliance, and had forced the sect to change its name as such. He'd trod roughshod over all the other sects in the state of Jiao, plundering their treasures, remaining unrivaled for some time. But things were different now. Patriarch Reliance had been missing for nearly 400 years. If it were not for the fact that no one knew if he was alive or dead, the sect would already have been swallowed up by some other sect. It was past its glory days. Considering the lack of resources in the state of Jiao, and pressure from the other 3 sects, if they wanted to get new recruits, they were forced to kidnap people to act as servants. There was no way they could open their doors to recruit openly. Meng Hao followed the green-robed man along the small paths that wound among the mountain peaks. The surroundings were garden-like, with strange rocks and odd-looking trees everywhere. Amidst the beautiful scenery, extravagantly decorated buildings with jade roof tiles rose up out of the clouds and mist. Meng Hao sighed continuously. Sadly, the fat teenager next to him wailed the entire time, somewhat ruining the mood. "I'm finished, really finished. I want to go home," muttered the fat teenager, tears rolling down his face. "There's manchu waiting at home, and fish. Damn it, damn it. I want to inherit the family land, become a rich old man, and have a few concubines. I don't want to be a servant here." He muttered under his breath for the time it takes to drink half a cup of tea, until the green-robed man turned. "If you spout one more bit of nonsense," he said coldly, "I'll cut your tongue out." The fat teenager suddenly trembled violently, his eyes shining with fear, but he shut his mouth. When he saw this, Meng Hao began to reconsider how wonderful the situation might or might not be. But he had a persistent personality, so he took a deep breath and maintained his silence. After a while, when they reached a point about halfway up the mountain, Meng Hao saw a row of flat buildings emerging from the roiling fog. 7 or 8 young people wearing hemp robes sat outside the buildings. They looked exhausted. As Meng Hao and the others approached, the young people noticed them, but did not call out any greetings. Some distance away, a young man wearing a light blue robe sat on a crag. His face was long, almost like a horse, and his robe was obviously more expensive and fancy than those worn by the other youths. Though his face was cold, when the green-robed man approached leading Meng Hao, the young man stood and greeted him with cupped fists. "Greetings, elder brother. These are 2 newly arrived servants," said the green-robed man impatiently. "Please arrange for their accommodations." With that, he turned and left, not even glancing at Meng Hao and the other young man. After he left, the horse-faced young man sat down again, crossing his legs and coldly glancing over Meng Hao and the fat teenager. "This is the northern servants' quarter," he said in a cold, emotionless voice. "The Reliant sect does not support slackers. Now that you're here, you will work for 30 years, upon which you can leave. If you try to escape, well, there are many wild beasts in these lonely mountains, and you will certainly die. Go retrieve your work uniform. From now on, you are isolated from the mortal world, and will work peacefully as a servant." The fat teenager trembled even harder, his face filling with despair. Meng Hao remained calm. In fact, deep within his eyes was an indescribable sparkle. The horse-faced man noticed. He had held this position for many years and had seen many young people captured to be servants, but had never seen anyone as calm as Meng Hao. "If you have a good temperament," he said lightly, "you may not need to labor for the full 30 years. You can practice cultivation in your time off. If you manage to reach the first level of qi condensation, then you will be promoted to the outer sect." He flicked his wide sleeve, whereupon 2 hemp robes appeared in front of Meng Hao and the fat teenager. On the front of each robe was a wooden badge the size of a thumb, engraved with the character servant. In addition to the robe, there was also a small booklet, upon the cover of which was written 3 characters, Qi Condensation Manual. As soon as Meng Hao laid eyes on the characters, he began to breathe hard. He stared at the booklet and recalled how, when discussing the cold-faced woman, the green-robed man had mentioned the 7th level of Qi condensation. "We can become outer sect disciples when we reach the 1st level, but that woman has already reached the 7th level. What is Qi condensation? Perhaps that is the way to become an immortal, like they talk about in stories. If that was the pay he would receive from his work, well, it might not be money, but it would be worth hundreds of pieces of gold in the outside world." Meng Hao's excitement rose. He grabbed the robe and used it to wrap up the badge and booklet. "The East 7th house is where you will live. Starting tomorrow, your job is to cut wood. 10 logs each, every day. You are not permitted to eat until your chopping is finished." He closed his eyes. Breathing deeply, Meng Hao imitated the young man and saluted with clasped fists, then walked toward the house, followed by the fat teenager. The building appeared to be a Sehaiwan courtyard dwelling that had been expanded multiple times. Following the signs, they located the seventh one, then opened the door and entered. The room wasn't large. It contained a table and 2 small beds, and though simple, was quite neat and tidy. The fat teenager sat down on one of the beds, then, unable to hold it in anymore, began to cry. He was about 12 or 13 years old, and he cried loudly. It surely echoed outside. My father is a lord, and I'm supposed to be a lord too. I'm not supposed to be a servant. He seemed extremely distraught, and his fat little body trembled. Stop crying, said Meng Hao, trying to comfort him. Think about it. It's not that bad here. We're working for immortals. How many people would envy us if they knew? He quickly closed the door. I don't want to work for other people, he replied. My marriage has already been arranged and engagement gifts sent. My poor, beautiful lady hasn't even married me, yet is already a widow. The more he cried, the more heartbroken he grew. A strange expression appeared on Meng Hao's face. This fat teenager was still young, he thought to himself. I can't believe he's been promised a wife, yet has never even felt the touch of a woman's hand. He sighed emotionally, thinking about how amazing it would be to be rich. This fat teenager's family is so rich that he never has to worry about food or clothing. And yet I have nothing. Even after selling my ancestral home last year, I still owe Steward Ju a lot of money. Thinking of the money he owed made him laugh. Now that he was here, Ju could come to chase after him for the money if he was strong enough. If not, he would be dead by the time Meng Hao left. The more he thought about this place, the better he felt about it. He didn't need to worry about money, or lodging, or food. He even got payment worth hundreds of pieces of gold, and that was before he even started working. Considering that this was a dwelling place of immortals, it could truly be said that he had unexpectedly been rescued from a desperate situation. The fat teenager's crying had begun to annoy him. Ignoring him, he pulled the manual out from the hemp robe and started reading. After reading the first line of the first page, he felt shocked. A person should have something to rely on. If you are a mortal who desires riches and titles, if you are a cultivator who wants to live a life free from worry, join my Reliance sect. You can rely on me. That was the introduction to the manual, and it was signed by Patriarch Reliance. Even though it was only a handful of words, they were filled with an indescribable power. It was both an invitation and a description of the Reliance sect. Meng Hao felt numb, and then, everything suddenly made sense. The Reliance sect. Is this the meaning of the sect? People must find something to rely on. When they find the Reliance sect, then they will be rich, powerful and free from worry. It made more and more sense. He realized that if he'd had an official to rely on, he would never have failed the examinations 3 times in a row. He sighed, his respect growing for Patriarch Reliance, whom he had never actually met. With that one sentence, it seemed as if a door in his life had suddenly opened. In other words, I have to find someone to rely on while I'm here. If I do, I won't have to worry about anything. His eyes grew brighter as he continued to scan the manual. Soon, he lost track of time and didn't even notice the fat teenager crying next to him. The fat teenager finally cried himself to sleep around midnight, whereupon his snores began to reverberate around the room like thunder. Meng Hao reluctantly closed the manual. Even though he felt very tired, his eyes were filled with vim and vigor. This book isn't worth 100 gold, it's worth 1,000, he said to himself. For someone who had always dreamed of becoming a rich official, something worth 1,000 gold was worth more than anything except his life. In his excitement, he noticed that the fat teenager's snoring had ceased. He looked over and saw that the young man had sat up in bed and was waving his arms around and muttering, "I'm gonna beat you to death." How dare you steal my mantu? I'm gonna bite you to death. How dare you steal away my wife? As he talked, he got off the bed, his eyes still closed, waving his fists angrily. Then, amazingly, he grabbed the table and bit the corner hard with his mouth, leaving a deep mark. Then he went back to sleep and began to snore. Meng Hao watched him for a bit, just to confirm that he had been sleepwalking just now. Then he looked back to the bite mark, realizing that he should never provoke the fat teenager when he was asleep. He inched away from him, then looked down at the manual again, feeling excited. The 9th level of Qi condensation is the path to being an immortal. Working for them, I have a chance to become an immortal myself. That is the biggest payment possible. If I become an immortal, I must have a chance to become rich. Meng Hao gripped the manual, his eyes shining brightly. He had finally found another path besides studying for the exams. At that moment, the door was kicked open with a bang, and a loud harumph sounded out. Chapter 3, Promotion to the Outer Sect. You went to sleep early. Now it's time to wake up for Grandpa Tiger. The door shook as it opened, and a tall, strong man entered wearing servant's robes. He glared fiercely at Meng Hao and the fat teenager. Starting today, he said angrily, you two little bastards will chop 10 trees per day for me, each. Otherwise, Grandpa Tiger will flay you alive. Greetings, Grandpa Tiger, said Meng Hao, scrambling off the bed and standing there nervously. Maybe you could quiet down. Before he could finish speaking, the large man fixed his eyes on him. Quiet farts. You think I'm speaking too loud? Looking at his fierce bearing and large stature, Meng Hao hesitated, then said, but the elder brother in charge of servants already assigned us to chop down 10 trees per day. Then chop an extra 10 for me, he said with a cold harumph. Though Meng Hao said nothing, his brain spun. He had just arrived in the immortal sect, and was already being bullied. He didn't want to give in, but the man was so big and strong, and he himself was clearly too weak, unable to fight back. Then he glanced at the table, and noticed the bite marks. Thinking back to how strong the fat teenager had been in the clutches of his dream walking, he had a flash of inspiration. He suddenly yelled at the sleeping fat teenager. Fatty! Someone stealing your manchu and your girl. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, the fat teenager sat up, eyes closed, shouting, his face twisted with furious savagery. Who's stealing my manchu? Who's stealing my wife? He cried, leaping out of the bed. I'll beat you to death. I'll bite you to death. He began striking randomly around the room. The big man stared in shock, then took a step forward and made to slap the boy. You dare to shout in front of Grandpa Tiger? His slap landed on the boy's face, but then the big man cried out. The fat teenager, eyes closed, had bitten down onto the man's arm. No matter how the man shook his arm, the boy refused to let go. Stop biting me, damn it. Stop biting. This man was a servant, not a cultivator. He had been a servant for a long time, and his body was strong, but the pain had caused him to break out in a cold sweat. He punched and kicked, but couldn't make the fat teenager loosen his jaw even the slightest bit. The harder he hit, the deeper the boy bit. The man's flesh was mangled, and it seemed as if a chunk were about to be ripped off. His screams drifted outside, such that others began to notice. A cold voice shouted out. What's the ruckus? It was the voice of the horse-faced young man. As soon as the big man heard it, he began to tremble in fear. Despite the horrible pain which twisted his face, he ceased his screaming. It's not a good idea to upset the elder brother in charge of servants, said the big man hurriedly. There's no benefit to continuing this. Quick, stop biting me. I don't need the 10 logs. Meng Hao never imagined the fat teenager's dream state would be so intense, and also wanted to stop the situation. He walked forward and lightly slapped the fat teenager, then whispered into his ear. The manchu is back, and so is your girl. The young man suddenly relaxed and released his jaw. Continuing to punch the air, he returned to his bed, his face covered in blood, then fell back to sleep. Giving another nervous glance toward the fat teenager, the big man left without saying another word. Meng Hao stood there for a while gaping, admiring the fat teenager, then returned to bed with the greatest of care and went back to sleep. The following morning at dawn. As the morning sun filled the sky, the sound of bells filled the air. It seemed to carry with it a strange power. As people heard it, they woke and began their work. The fat teenager woke up. He looked down dumbly at the marks on his body. He touched his face. What happened last night? How come my whole body hurts? Did someone beat me up? Meng Hao dressed silently for a while before speaking. Nothing happened. Everything seemed normal. How come my face feels swollen? Maybe it's mosquitoes. Then how come my mouth has blood on it? You fell out of bed last night. Several times, in fact. Meng Hao opened the door and stepped out, then stopped and looked back. Look, fatty, he said in a serious tone, you need to grind your teeth more often, sharpen them up. Oh? My dad used to say the same thing, he said in surprise, gingerly putting on his robes. Meng Hao and the fat teenager walked out into the sunlight and began their life as servants in the Reliant sect, chopping down trees. Each of them was responsible for 10 trees. Around the northern servants' quarter, the wild slopes were covered with trees. Although the trees were not big, they were very dense and spread like an ocean as far as the eye could see. Carrying his servant's axe, Meng Hao rubbed at his shoulder. His arm felt both numb and painful. The axe was heavy. Off to the side, the fat teenager panted as they climbed. Eventually, they found a suitable area, and the sound of chopping axes gradually rang out as they began to work. My dad is super rich, said the fat teenager with a long face. He raised his axe. I'm gonna be super rich too. I don't want to be a servant. These immortals are strange, and they have magic. What do they need fire for? And why do they need us to chop down trees for them? Unlike the garrulous fat teenager, Meng Hao was too tired to speak. Sweat showered off of him like rain. Because of his poverty in Yunjie County, he hadn't been able to eat much meat and as such his body was weak. He didn't have much energy. After the space of time it takes half an incense stick to burn, he leaned up against a tree, breathing heavily. He looked at the fat teenager who, though he was so tired he trembled, he continued to curse under his breath and chop at the tree. He was younger than Meng Hao, but a lot stronger. Meng Hao shook his head bitterly and continued to rest. He pulled out the Qi condensation manual and examined it again. Following the description in the manual, he attempted to sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Time passed, and soon it was dusk. In his day of work, Meng Hao had managed to cut down 2 trees. The fat teenager had managed to cut down 8. By pooling them together, it was enough for one of them to eat. They consulted for a bit, and then the fat teenager went to get some food which the 2 of them shared in their room. Then they fell to sleep, exhausted. Eventually, the fat teenager's snores filled the room, and Meng Hao struggled to sit up, his eyes filled with determination. Ignoring his hunger and exhaustion, he picked up the Qi condensation manual and started reading it again. When I used to study for the examinations, I would usually stay up reading until dawn. I'm used to being hungry. As for my life now, it may be tiring, but at least I have a goal. I can't believe that after failing in the imperial examinations, I will fail in cultivation. Stubborn persistence shone in his eyes. He lowered his head and began to study. He continued on until late in the night, until he finally fell asleep, although when exactly that was, he didn't know. As he slept, his dreams were filled with thoughts of sensing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. The bells woke him up in the morning. He opened his bloodshot eyes, yawned, and got out of bed. Then, along with the energetic fat teenager, went back to chopping wood. A day, 2 days, 3 days, time continued on until 2 months had passed. Meng Hao's wood-felling ability slowly grew until he could chop down 4 trees in a day. But most of his time was spent trying to grasp the meaning of spiritual energy. His eyes grew more and more bloodshot. Then one evening around dusk, as he sat panting in meditation, his body suddenly vibrated, and he felt a prickling numbness in his limbs. Then, it seemed as if tiny wisp of invisible qi condensed within his flesh and blood, then seeped out of his body. After that, he felt a strand of spiritual energy appear inside him. It disappeared almost instantly, but Meng Hao opened his eyes excitedly. His exhaustion disappeared, and his bloodshot eyes grew whiter. His body trembling, he clutched at the qi condensation manual. He hadn't eaten or slept much in the past months. Other than chopping down trees, he spent almost all his time on spiritual energy, and now, at long last, he had some results. He felt as if he were filled with power. Time passed in a flash, 2 months, and now it was the 8th month of the year, summer. Broiling sunlight fell from the sky. Condense the qi into the body, fuse and disperse it, open the blood vessels and qi passages, resonate with heaven and earth. It was noontime in the deep mountains near the Reliance sect. Meng Hao used one hand to stoke the bonfire in front of him, and the other to hold the qi condensation manual, which he studied intently. He closed his eyes for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, sensing the delicate strand of qi within his body. This was the qi which had appeared 2 months ago, and Meng Hao regarded it as a treasure. The strand was clearly much thicker now. Using the mnemonics and circulation technique described in the manual, he sat in meditation, allowing the qi strand to move about his body. After a short time, Meng Hao opened his eyes and caught sight of the fat teenager approaching quickly, carrying his axe. "Well, how is it?" panted the fat teenager as he ran up. Though fat, his body was strong. "I still can't disseminate it throughout my entire body," said Meng Hao with a laugh. "But I'm quite confident that within a month, I'll be able to reach the first stage of qi condensation." Belief filled his demeanor. "What I meant was, how is the chicken?" He licked his lips as he looked at the bonfire. "Oh, pretty much done," said Meng Hao, also licking his lips and pulling back the branch he'd been using to stoke the fire. The fat teenager used his axe to dig through the soil and pull the chicken out. It was fully cooked now. A fragrant aroma filled the air. They split the chicken in half and began to wolf it down. "Ever since you were able to get some spiritual energy," said the fat teenager, his lips covered in grease, "you've been able to catch wild chickens." Compared to now, the first 2 months here were like a nightmare. This was his new practice, to flatter Meng Hao. "A lot of people get food out in the wild, you just don't know about it, that's all." As Meng Hao spoke, he took a bite out of a chicken leg, making his speech a bit garbled. If you really reach the first level of qi condensation next week and become an outer sect disciple," said the fat teenager, his face bitter, "then what will I do? I don't understand any of those mnemonics." He looked at Meng Hao expectantly. "Look, fatty, the only way you can get home is if you become an outer sect disciple," said Meng Hao, dropping the chicken leg and looking him in the eye. The fat teenager sat quietly for a while before giving a determined nod. 6 days flew by. It was night. The fat teenager was already asleep, and Meng Hao sat cross-legged in his room, meditating. He thought about how, other than wood chopping, he had spent all his time these past 3 months in sensing spiritual energy. He thought back to 2 months ago, when the strand of qi had first stirred within him. He breathed deeply, closing his eyes and causing the strand of spiritual energy to circulate throughout his body. Then, a loud sound reverberated in his head. Up to now, he had been unable to disperse the qi throughout his entire body. But just now, he had succeeded, diffusing the qi to every corner of his body. He felt as if his body were floating. At the same moment in which Meng Hao achieved the first level of qi condensation, the horse-faced young man sitting on the big stone outside slowly opened his eyes. He looked in the direction of Meng Hao's house, then closed his eyes again. At dawn, under the envious eyes of everyone in the northern servants' quarter, Meng Hao walked out of the room that had been his home for the past 4 months. He stood in front of the horse-faced youth. The fat teenager didn't come with him. He remained in the doorway watching Meng Hao, determination filling his eyes. You reached the first level of qi condensation in 4 months. You're not quite outstanding, but not stupid, either. The horse-faced young man looked at him, his expression no longer cold. Calmly, he said, "Now that you are going to the outer sect, I must explain to you the rules there. Every month, spirit stones and medicinal pills will be distributed there, but it is not prohibited to take things by force from others, or to gang up. There is a public area there that some people call the killing zone. You will need to look out for yourself." As he finished speaking, he lifted his right hand, whereupon a jade slip shot out and hovered in front of Meng Hao. He grabbed it. Imbue spiritual energy into that jade slip and it will lead you to the treasure pavilion in the outer sect. That is where you will register your promotion. The horse-faced young man closed his eyes. Meng Hao said nothing. Clasping his fist in salute, he turned and glanced at the fat teenager. They looked at each other for a moment, and Meng Hao felt emotion welling up in his heart. He chose not to dwell on it. He pinched the jade slip, which then began to glow with a green light, and gradually floated forward. Meng Hao followed it, slowly leaving the servants' quarter. He trod a narrow road which led away from the main gate, walking further and further away, toward the foot of the mountain. Eventually he reached an area he had never stepped foot into during the past 4 months. The Reliant sect was comprised of 4 main mountains, with east, west, north and south peaks, respectively. Surrounding them were vast mountain chains which seemed to never end. At the halfway point up each mountain was a servant's quarter. Meng Hao had been assigned to the northern servant's quarter on the northern mountain. The way further up was protected by defensive spells. Beyond them lived the inner sect disciples and elders. Each of the 4 mountains was like this. As for the flat area in between them all, it was filled with countless houses inhabited by the Reliant sect's outer sect. In this respect, the Reliant sect was slightly different than other sects. The outer sect was located at the foot of the mountain, whereas the servants lived halfway up. This was a sect rule created for unknown reasons by Patriarch Reliance. From a distance, the entire area seemed to be filled with roiling fog. However, upon stepping foot into the fog, it disappeared. In front of him stretched a scene of carved balustrades and marble steps, of lofty buildings and roads paved with green stone. Outer sect disciples bustled about wearing green robes. A few of them noticed Meng Hao as he walked past. Some of them shot him contemptuous glances which lacked even the slightest bit of good intent. He felt as if he were being stared at by wild beasts, which caused him to recall what elder brother Horseface had said about the outer sect. Not long after that, he reached a black building in the southern section of the outer sect. It was 3 stories tall, and despite being black, appeared to have been carved from jade, and almost seemed to be transparent. As Meng Hao approached, the building's main door opened noiselessly and out walked a wizened, middle-aged man. He wore a long robe of deep green, and a shrewd expression covered his face. He lifted his right hand in a grabbing motion, and the jade slip flew into his hand. He looked at it then began to speak languidly. Meng Hao has been promoted to the outer sect. He shall be bestowed with a house, a green robe, a spirit tablet, and a bag of holding. The spirit tablet can be used to enter the treasure pavilion to retrieve a magic item. He waved his right hand, and a grey bag appeared in Meng Hao's hands. He looked at the grey bag for a moment, then thought back to one of the outer sect disciples he'd passed on the road. That man had a bag just like this hanging at his waist. The shrewd-looking man looked at Meng Hao, and could instantly tell that he was not familiar at all with the ways of the outer sect. Otherwise, how could he be unfamiliar with a bag of holding? Feeling a bit bad for him, he coolly said, "By imbuing the bag with spiritual energy, you can pack many things into it." Having heard this, Meng Hao imbued the bag with a sizable amount of spiritual energy. It grew blurry, and then he caught a glimpse of a space inside about half the size of a person. There, he could see a green robe, a jade slip, and some other objects. At this point, his interest was quite piqued. This bag of holding must be worth at least 100 gold. It clearly was the product of immortal hands. He concentrated, and the jade slip suddenly appeared in his hand. He focused his attention even more and found that inside the bag was a map of the outer sect quarter. In a remote corner was his house. "Go look at it later," said the shrewd-looking man coldly. "The treasure pavilion is open and you haven't entered it yet." Meng Hao lifted his head and stuffed the bag of holding into his robe. Looking at the open door of the treasure pavilion, he sucked in a deep breath and stepped in, filled with anticipation. As soon as he entered, his expression changed, and he sucked in a breath. Chapter 4: A Copper Mirror. The treasure pavilion was indeed filled with treasure. Upon entering it, one's eye would be dazzled with brilliant lights. Neatly arranged jade shelves were filled with a dazzling display of bottles, swords, ornaments, and jewelry. Meng Hao began breathing heavily, and his heart started pumping. It felt as if all the blood in his body had rushed to his brain. He stood there, dumbfounded. In Meng Hao's short life, he had never seen so much wealth. He felt as if it had submerged him. His brain spun, and he inadvertently thought about grabbing all of it and running away. "The value of these treasures," murmured Meng Hao, "they're priceless. The compensation for working for immortals, it's incredible." He walked past one of the jade shelves, his expression filled with excitement, unconsciously stretching his head forward. He wondered if the third floor of the treasure pavilion was the same as the first, or if it perhaps had even more valuable treasures. Immortals, they're so rich. Meng Hao heaved a deep sigh. Suddenly, his eyes fell upon something strange. On one of the jade shelves he noticed a copper mirror. There were traces of corrosion on it. It didn't seem very special, nor did it glitter. It didn't seem like it could compare in any way to the treasures around it. Surprised, Meng Hao picked it up and looked at it closely. It seemed quite ordinary, like something from the mortal world. Nothing about it seemed the least bit unique. And yet, here it was in the treasure pavilion, so he assumed it must have some value. "Junior brother truly has insight," said a voice from behind him. He didn't know when the shrewd-looking man had entered, but he stood there looking at the copper mirror. His voice filled with praise, he continued, "The fact that you picked up that copper mirror shows that you were destined to do so. There are many legends regarding it. The strangest thing is, only those with good fortune and accumulated good deeds in past lives can acquire it. It seems Junior brother is just such a person. With this mirror, you can lord it over heaven and earth. You definitely have this opportunity." As the man spoke, he sighed over and over. His voice seemed to contain some strange power which forced Meng Hao to listen to him. "This mirror?" Meng Hao looked down at it again, a strange expression on his face. It was not covered with complicated carvings, but instead, corrosion, making it very unclear. "Junior brother, don't look at the mirror's blurriness. You should know that true treasures of a spiritual nature often conceal themselves in ordinary things. The more humble they appear, the more precious they are." Meng Hao was about to put the copper mirror back onto the shelf when the shrewd-looking man took several hasty steps forward to prevent him. He looked seriously at Meng Hao. "Junior brother, the fact that you picked up this object shows that you were destined to do so. Will you really put it back just because it looks ordinary? I have been responsible for the treasure pavilion for many years, and I know the origin of all the items here. Many years ago, this copper mirror caused a huge commotion in the state of Jiao. It was created from a ray of light which fell from the heavens. After acquiring it, Patriarch Reliant studied it in secret, believing it to be a treasure of the heavens. In the end, he couldn't unlock its mysteries, and came to the conclusion that it was predestined to fall into the hands of someone who would use it to trample upon heaven and earth." It startled Meng Hao to hear the name of Patriarch Reliance. He had just entered the outer sect, and there were many things he wasn't familiar with. He began to hesitate. Patriarch Reliant studied it, but couldn't understand it. Your words are incorrect, junior brother. Allow elder brother to explain. Patriarch Reliance's lack of success in his studies proves that there is something unique and unusual about this treasure. Before you, 10 or more people took it to study it, and though none of them succeeded in understanding it, none of them regretted their decision. What if you are the person destined to possess the mirror? In any case, if you take it, you can rest at ease. Of your fellow disciples who took the mirror in the past, most came back within 3 months, and I let them exchange it for something else. After dealing with me for some time, you will find that I am very easygoing. I don't want to give fellow disciples a hard time. If you take it, but are unable to unlock its mysteries, then you can return it at any time and exchange it for something else. But if you abandon it, and it turns out you were destined to take it, then you will regret it for your entire life. The shrewd-looking man stared intently at Meng Hao. When he saw Meng Hao hesitating, he laughed to himself. The new disciples were always the easiest to toy with. All he had to do was tell them the story of the mirror's legend, and the grand words would seduce them. Their hearts would begin to boil. But Meng had studied and read from childhood, so he was quite intelligent. From the shrewd-looking man's seemingly earnest expression, he could conjecture that the mirror was not exactly as had been described. But the man stood there in front of him, clearly determined to prevent him from putting back the mirror. Even dropping it to the ground would be of little use. He began to regret picking it up in the first place. "Junior brother," he said, his face stern, his voice low, "don't violate the rules on your first day. When you pick something up in the treasure pavilion, you are not permitted to put it down." The shrewd-looking man felt that enough was enough. This was his usual method to get people to take the mirror. He waved his wide sleeve, and a whistling wind picked up Meng Hao, flew him out of the treasure pavilion, and deposited him outside. There was a crashing sound as the main door of the treasure pavilion slammed shut. The voice of the shrewd-looking man echoed from inside, "I'm soft-hearted when it comes to fellow disciples. If you truly are not destined to have the mirror, then you can return it in a few days." Frowning angrily, Meng Hao looked up at the closed door. Then he sighed and looked back down at the copper mirror in his hands. He thought back to the words in the first chapter of the Qi condensation manual and hesitated. If this truly was something that Patriarch Reliance had studied, then it must have some value. Shaking his head, he put the mirror into his robe. Then, with a final hateful glare at the treasure pavilion, he turned and left. He walked along the green paths of the outer sect, using the information from the jade slip as a guide. Around noontime, he found his house. It was along the north border, in a very remote section of the outer sect. Several other houses crowded around it. He pushed the door open, and it slammed against the wall. Inside were a bed and a desk. Meng Hao stood there, feeling quite content. This place was much better than his room in the servants' quarter. He sat down cross-legged on the bed, took a deep breath and pulled the copper mirror out of his robe. He studied it carefully, until the sun began to set over the western mountains. He lit an oil lamp and continued to study it, all to no avail. He had no idea what the purpose of the mirror could be. No matter how he looked at it, the copper mirror seemed completely ordinary in nature. When the night grew deep, Meng Hao put the mirror to the side and looked out the window at the moon. He thought about the fat teenager and his snoring. He missed it a little bit. The bright moon shone outside, its rays touching the eaves of his window. Everything was silent, save for the sound of the wind among the leaves of the trees. Meng Hao took a deep breath, thinking about the moon. He felt emotional, as if he had entered a new age. He murmured to himself, "I will never again be a scholar in Yunjia County. I've become a Reliance Outer Sect disciple." Meng Hao gathered his thoughts, closed his eyes, and sat in meditation, circulating the thread of spiritual energy in his body. He had been living in this fashion for months now, and was used to it. One difference between the outer sect and the servants' quarter was that here, no one prepared food for you. You had to take care of your own food needs. If you didn't, you would starve to death and no one would care a whit. Although, in all the years, no one in the Reliance outer sect had ever starved to death. Upon reaching the first stage of chi condensation, one could absorb and emit the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Though that could not alleviate hunger, it could sustain your life. Several days passed. One afternoon, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in meditation when he suddenly heard a miserable scream from outside. He immediately opened his eyes, moved to the window and looked outside. He saw an outer sect disciple on the ground, being stamped upon over and over again by another. Blood oozed from a wound in his chest, but he wasn't dead, just wounded. The person who had been kicking him grabbed his bag of holding, then walked off with a cold harumph. The trampled disciple struggled to his feet, his eyes filled with violent ruthlessness. He staggered away. Surrounding onlookers stared at him coldly, their faces filled with ridicule. Meng Hao observed silently. He had watched similar scenes played out countless times in the past few days, and as such had a deeper understanding of the ways of the outer sect. Time blurred as 7 days passed. During that time, Meng Hao saw even more instances of disciples being robbed. The fighting and plundering which occurred between outer sect disciples caused Meng Hao to grow more and more taciturn. Especially disturbing was when he had seen a disciple of the second or third level of chi condensation killed by another in the public area. This caused Meng Hao to be especially careful and cautious when he went outside. Thankfully, his cultivation base was low, and he didn't have anything of value, so others mostly ignored him. Actually, Meng Hao had reached a standstill in his cultivation. The second level of chi condensation was different than the first. He still needed spiritual energy, but according to the chi condensation manual, his mortal body had already begun to change. As such, reaching the second level of chi condensation would require many more times the amount of spiritual energy than the first level did. Similarly, Meng Hao now understood what latent talent was. The body's ability to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was just that, latent talent. The more latent talent someone has, the more energy they could absorb. The less latent talent one has, the less energy they could absorb. For someone with considerable latent talent, the more time they spent on breathing exercises, the more spiritual energy they could absorb. According to his calculations, to reach the second level of chi condensation would probably take at least 1 or 2 years. The amount of time required to reach the third level would be many more times than that. Of course, if he acquired some medicinal pills or spirit stones, he could use them to amplify spiritual energy, then he could decrease that time. That was why so much horrific robbery occurred in the outer sect. Every month, pills would be openly distributed. The strong become stronger, the weak become weaker, said Meng Hao quietly. This is how the Reliant sect grooms disciples for the inner sect. One early morning, when the sky had just begun to grow dim with light, Meng Hao sat in meditation as usual. He had no special resources, except for his determination. Therefore, he did not give up on his nightly meditations and breathing exercises. Bells reverberated throughout the sect, and Meng Hao slowly opened his eyes. These bells, Meng Hao's eyes focused, as if he had come to a realization. An excited expression appeared on his face, and he dashed out of the room to see fellow disciples everywhere, rushing off into the distance. When these bells sound, the time has come for distribution of spirit stones and medicinal pills. It must be today. More and more people began running in the direction of the bells. It seemed everyone within the outer sect was there. Pill distribution day, said Meng Hao, breathing heavily. He ran along with the crowds until he reached the square in the center of the outer sect. The square was monumental in size, and along its borders were 9 stone pillars covered in carvings of dragons. Placed on the foremost pillar was a platform over 90 meters in diameter, over which swirled a multicolored cloud. Inside the cloud could be seen shapeless forms. Over 100 outer sect disciples stood there in their green robes, murmuring amongst themselves and glancing frequently at the multicolored cloud. Then, the cloud slowly dissipated, revealing a pock-faced old man wearing a golden robe. His face was placid and emitted a calm, natural power and dignity. His eyes shone like lightning. 2 people stood next to him, a man and a woman, both wearing silver robes. The man was exceedingly handsome, with an upright appearance, although indifference covered his face. As for the woman, as soon as Meng Hao laid eyes on her, his pupils constricted. This woman was the woman who had taken him from Daking Mountain 3 months ago. Chapter 5. This kid isn't bad. It turns out Master Uncle Shangguan is distributing the pills himself, along with inner sect disciples elder sister Shu and elder brother Chen. They all came. You don't see this very often. Don't tell me there's an individual pill distribution this time. It must be. Look, elder brother Hanzong, 1. Hanzong's name in Chinese is Hanzong. Han is a common family name. Zong means sect or religion, is here. He's the second-ranked disciple in the outer sect. His cultivation base has reached the 5th level of qi condensation. If he can reach the 7th level, then he will automatically become an inner sect disciple. Too bad elder brother Wang Tengfei, 2. Wang Tengfei's name in Chinese is Wang Tengfei. Wang is a common family name. Tengfei means to soar, isn't here. Considering elder brother Wang Tengfei's abilities, he wouldn't care a whit about medicinal pills. The year he joined the sect, he caused a big sensation amongst the sect elders. He probably doesn't want to violate sect etiquette, so he'll rely only on himself to enter the inner sect. Then there will finally be a 3rd inner sect disciple. Heh, this is gonna be fun. With individual pill distribution, there's a 24-hour period of sealing in which the pill can't be used. Every 2 hours, the pill glows brightly. Anyone who wants to fight for it will be able to determine its location. Even if you grab the pill and run, you won't be able to keep it hidden for 24 hours. Meng Hao listened to the discussions around him. Even though it was his first time taking part in this sort of thing, he knew whenever pills were distributed, there was a lot of fighting. In his half a month here, he had seen plenty of fights and even some deaths. If today was really an individual pill distribution day, then the fighting would be even more intense. Meng Hao remained silent. Considering he was at the 1st level of qi condensation, there was no way he would end up with the pill. Just looking at the greedy faces around him gave him a deeper understanding of the expression "the law of the jungle." "Quiet," said the old man in the gold robe. His voice was cold as he stood on the platform, and though he didn't speak loudly, his voice reverberated like a booming thunderclap. The cultivators standing below him were shocked to the core. "There is hummed." Meng Hao was the most shocked of all, and it took him some time to recover. "I am Shangguan Xiu, 3. Shangguan Xiu's name in Chinese is Shangguan Xiu. Shangguan is a relatively obscure family name. Xiu is the same character which appears in terms like cultivation and cultivator. Today, everyone in attendance will receive 1 spirit condensation pill and half a spirit stone. Shangguan Xiu flicked his right arm, and immediately, hundreds of medicinal pills and spirit stones flew about in all directions. They landed perfectly in front of everyone present. Meng Hao gazed at the medicinal pill and spirit stone floating in front of him. A fragrant, intoxicating aroma washed over him. This was his first time ever seeing a medicinal pill or a spirit stone. The spirit stone was about the size of his fingernail, sparkling and almost translucent. Just looking at it could mystify a person. His heart began to beat rapidly. These 2 items must be worth thousands of pieces of gold. Without any hesitation, Meng Hao reached out and grabbed the pill. He was about to pop it into his mouth and swallow it down when he noticed that no one around him was doing any such thing. His heart lurched. He looked down at the pill in his hand and noticed that it had a faint glow to it, and was sealed with a strange mark. As Meng Hao stared at the pill in his hand, Shangguan Xiu's voice once again rang out from the platform, there is also a dry spirit pill. A purple-colored medicinal pill could be seen in his hand. As soon as it appeared, a wonderful fragrance filled the entire square. Even just breathing it, Meng Hao felt as if his spiritual energy had increased a bit. This was clearly no ordinary pill. That's a dry spirit pill. That's something incredibly precious to anyone under the 5th level of qi condensation. There can't be many within the sect, and yet, there it is. When that pill is distributed, the fighting here in the outer sect will be fierce. Who knows how many people will die? The crowd buzzed as they stared up at the glowing pill held by Shangguan Xiu, their faces filled with greed and desire. This was especially true of disciples who were on the brink of breaking through to a new level of cultivation. They fairly panted. Originally, the dry spirit pill was not to be distributed today. However, I heard there was a disciple promoted to the outer sect this month, which makes me very happy. If we can do this every month, then brilliant glory lies just around the corner for the Reliant sect. I bestow this pill upon that person as an encouragement. Shangguan Xiu smiled, and his glittering eyes swept across the crowd to fall upon Meng Hao. Meng Hao's heart began to race. The first half of the short speech had left him feeling unsettled, but he had no time to react. Shangguan Xiu's right hand flicked, and the purple pill appeared in front of him. Before he could even make an attempt to refuse, the pill lowered into his hand. As of that moment, Meng Hao's entrance into the Reliant sect could be called unprecedented. The eyes of the entire crowd focused on him. Greed and cruelty filled their expressions, as if they planned to rip him to pieces alive. Even the man and woman standing next to Shangguan Xiu were staring. The woman had a look of shock on her face, which she quickly covered up with an icy expression. Ha ha, so a first-level qi condensation disciple receives the pill. There will be a lot of fighting this time. This guy is going to be public enemy number 1. He's finished. Last time there was an individual pill day, the guy who received the pill was at the 2nd level of qi condensation. He hesitated for just a moment too long, so elder brother Zhao Wugang, 4. Zhao Wugang's name in Chinese is Zhao Wugang. Zhao is a common family name. Wu means martial or military. Gang means many things, including strong and unyielding, dragged him in a fury to the public area and lopped off his head. The sound of discussion reverberated across the square, and many disciples of the 2nd or 3rd qi condensation level, despite knowing the danger, grew greedy. Because the cultivation base of the person who received the pill was so weak, they felt as if they were qualified to snatch it. Meng Hao's entire body broke out in a cold sweat. He wanted to throw the pill away, but he found that it actually stuck to his hand, making it impossible to get rid of. Around him, covetous eyes stared at him menacingly, and suddenly, it was as if he could feel the shadow of death hanging over him. Some people began to slowly walk toward him, murderous expressions filling their faces. "Junior brother, why don't you toss that pill to me? If you don't, I'll give you a thrashing. If you don't give it to me, next year today will be the anniversary of your death." The murmurs blasted at him like a cold wind from all directions. At that moment, 2 old men sat cross-legged on one of the nearby mountain peaks, smiling as they discussed the scene unfolding in the outer sect square. Master Shangguan really doesn't pay attention to things. To give the medicinal pill to a pup like that who just entered the sect. He's finished. It seems our Reliant sect will be short another disciple. The fighting this time isn't going to be interesting at all. I bet that as soon as the restrictive fog dissipates from the square, the pup will toss the pill. As soon as the 2nd old man finished speaking, the 9 colorful, dragon-carved statues surrounding the square began to fade in color. From the look of it, after the space of about 10 breaths, they would be completely colorless. At that point, the restrictive fog would also disappear. Meng Hao's heart began to pound. He didn't need anyone to explain to him what would happen when the glowing pillars grew dark. The square would become a scene of madness. Even if he threw the pill away, that in and of itself would make some of the people angry at him. How could this be given to me?" said Meng Hao, sweating. His mind began to spin. If he didn't get rid of the pill, he would die. If he did throw it away, he would become an object of hatred. Trying to make use of all the knowledge he had acquired in his 3 years of studying, he looked at the fading, colorful glow, and then at Shangguan Xiu, who stood amidst the colorful fog on the platform, preparing to leave. At this critical moment, Meng Hao suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He took a step forward and called out, "Disciple has something to say." Being able to come to the Reliant sect and experience the wonders of living amidst immortals has been a wonderful stroke of good fortune. Disciple would very much like to offer thanks to the one person who made this possible. Disciple has been waiting day and night for another opportunity to lay eyes on her, to offer thanks in person. Today, I finally have that opportunity. He talked faster and faster, and as he did so, Shangguan Xiu stared in shock, no longer making his leave. That person is Elder Sister Shu. Elder Sister Shu, junior brother, is extremely appreciative of what you did, and is truly unable to pay you back. I would like to offer this pill to you as a measure of my thanks to you for giving me a new lease on life. Meng Hao lifted up his right hand, raising the medicinal pill up high. Shangguan Xiu gaped, clearly never having imagined that Meng Hao would say such a thing. A strange expression appeared on his face, and he slowly smiled. Standing next to him in her silver robe, Miss Shu also stared in shock. Even though she was still cold and detached, there was something different about her expression now. Her cultivation base was the 7th level of qi condensation, thus the dry spirit pills would not be of much help to her. However, dry spirit pills were still relatively rare and not easy to acquire, even for her, a member of the inner sect. If she took this pill and melded it together with a few other pills, she could create a new pill worth 5 normal pills. For a moment, she couldn't help but palpitate with eagerness. At this moment, even the man in the silver robe with the cool expression looked down at Meng Hao. Everyone was quiet. The cultivators who had been advancing on Meng Hao suddenly stopped in their tracks, strange expressions on their faces. They stared at him with confusion. After the brief silence, there was a sudden uproar. "You can do this? To give away a medicinal pill in front of all these people, to an inner sect disciple, who dares to fight for the pill now? That would basically be picking a fight with the inner sect. What a simple method. How come I never thought about that? Damn it, damn it. That freaking. I can't believe I didn't think of doing this that one time. I was injured so badly I was bedridden for 3 months. The people staring at Meng Hao seemed to all have different feelings on the matter. It was hard to say what had happened in ages past, but as for the cultivators here, they had never seen anyone deal with a medicinal pill in this fashion. As of now, Meng Hao had been indefinitely impressed onto everyone's memories. As of now, the dragon-carved pillars were completely colorless. The pill still lay in Meng Hao's outstretched palm, and yet no one moved to take it. This was truly something rare to see in the Reliant sect. Miss Shu's expression had returned to normal. Without hesitation, her right hand flashed downwards, and the medicinal pill flew from Meng Hao's hand into hers. Seeing the pill taken away, Meng Hao secretly sighed. However, he knew that in his current state, it could only bring him calamity. Around him, everyone else sighed, feeling angry at Meng Hao. But as soon as they thought of Elder Sister Shu, any such anger dissipated. Miss Shu hesitated for a moment. Considering her status as an inner sect disciple, it would be a bit improper to take something so valuable from an outer sect disciple and not offer anything in return. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Years ago, when I was a member of the outer sect, an immortal's cave was bestowed to me. I shall lend it to you to live in." She reached into her bag of holding and pulled out a white jade slip. She tossed it down toward Meng Hao and he grabbed it from the air. Elder Sister Shu's immortal's cave, this fellow really got lucky. They say there's a lot of spiritual energy in there, more than anywhere else in the sect. Elder Sister Shu says she's going to lend it, but she's obviously just giving it to him. She just used the word lend so that everyone wouldn't think too much. This kid really did the right thing in giving her the pill. Damn it, I wish I had thought of this back then. Just then, back atop the mountain peaks outside the outer sect were the two grey-robed old men who had been betting on the proceedings. Tall and grand, their eyes glittered brightly with praise. They laughed heartily. This kid is pretty interesting. He just entered the sect, but already knows that he should find someone to rely on. Don't tell me he has innate instincts. Very good, splendid. He comprehends the true meaning of the Reliance sect. This kid isn't bad. He really isn't bad. Chapter 6, The Delights of the Copper Mirror. Elder Sister Shu was quite well known in the Reliance sect. In fact, you could say that everyone knew her, because as of now, the Reliance inner sect only had 2 disciples. Other than Elder Sister Shu, the only other disciple was the man currently standing next to Shangguan Xiao. After Elder Sister Shu lent him her Immortal's Cave, it had a fear-inspiring effect on everyone, allowing Meng Hao to leave the square with the Spirit Stone and Spirit Condensation pills. Everyone watched him as he left. As he walked off into the distance, his back soaked with sweat, he felt the glares behind him like invisible blades. They slowly dissipated as he walked quickly away. In the time it takes 3 incense sticks to burn, Meng Hao walked without stopping. He didn't return to his room in the outer sect, but rather followed the white jade slip Elder Sister Shu had given him toward the southern mountain. At the foot of the mountain, he located the Immortal's Cave. Outside of the cave, 2 large stone slabs towered up next to the mountain face. Everything was covered with green branches and vines. It appeared to be an entirely unordinary place, very different from Meng Hao's previous 2 dwellings. The surroundings here were peaceful and lush. Not far away, a mountain spring flowed down, and the wind carried away the heat, replacing it with cool, fresh air. Meng Hao stood in front of the mouth of the Immortal's Cave, looking completely content. Now he truly understood how precious such a cave could be, clearly much more than any other dwelling place. No wonder all the other outer sect disciples had looked so jealous and envious when Elder Sister Shu lent it to him. "This is a place for immortals," said Meng Hao. He waved his right hand, and the slip of white jade flew forward to the cave's green stone door. It slapped onto the surface, and a buzzing sound filled the air as the door slowly opened. The Immortal's Cave was not very big, and only had 2 rooms. One room was for practicing cultivation, the other was sealed shut with a stone door. Meng Hao entered, and the green stone door slowly closed behind him. When it sealed, the white jade slip flew out and into Meng Hao's hand. Thereupon, a soft glow began to emanate from the craggy stone ceiling. The more he looked around, the more satisfied he felt. Finally, his gaze fell upon the sealed stone door. Muttering to himself, he placed the jade slip onto it, and the door slowly opened. At that moment, an odor of thick spiritual energy suddenly wafted out. Meng Hao looked into the stone room, his eyes wide with shock. Sister Shu's Immortal's Cave, this gift is just too valuable. It took a while for him to recover his composure. He stared blankly into the stone room, at something that appeared to be the mouth of a spring. Out of it gurgled pure spiritual energy, multicolored and glowing as it curled up into the air. Who knew how long it had been accumulating in the stone room? As soon as the door had opened, it began to pour out, its aroma sweet in the nose and mouth. Even just a whiff would fill you with energy. "So it's a spirit spring," Meng Hao murmured. It was something else he had never seen before, but had read about in the Qi condensation manual. Some springs in the world were spirit springs, which had no water. Instead, they flowed forth with spiritual energy. Not many existed, and most were occupied by cultivators, considering how treasured was the spiritual energy they emitted. The spirit spring was relatively small. When all its spiritual energy came out, it was only slightly thicker than outside. To anyone above the 3rd level of Qi condensation, it would not be very helpful. After the 3rd level, the spiritual energy required was just too much, thus, it was only moderately useful. Despite that, as far as Meng Hao was concerned, this gift was incomparably valuable, even much more so than a dry spirit pill. With this discovery, Meng Hao went nearly wild with joy. With no time to think, he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and began his breathing exercises. After a few hours, the greater part of the spiritual energy that had accumulated here was gone. Meng Hao opened his eyes, and they flashed brilliantly. These few hours of meditation here were worth about a month of cultivation outside. This accumulation of spiritual energy took quite some time to build up, and probably won't be like this again. Even still, practicing cultivation in here, I will be able to achieve speed that's impossible in the outside world. He sighed. Looking around, he noticed that the walls were covered with strange markings that he didn't understand. The spirit spring can accumulate so much spiritual energy because of these markings. Elder Sister Shu must have used this method to build up energy then dispose of it all in one shot. Meng Hao thought for another moment, then had an inspiration. He again sat down and began to do breathing exercises. The night passed quickly, and as the sun rose the next morning, Meng Hao opened his eyes. The spiritual energy in the stone room was very thin. But the spirit spring was still there. After some period of time passed, the spiritual energy would surely build up again. Meng Hao took a moment to sense his cultivation level. It seemed that he had made an advancement worth nearly 2 months. If I can practice cultivation in this fashion a few more times, I should be able to break through the first level of qi condensation and enter the second. He sucked in a breath, excited. He very much wanted to break through the first level, because only by reaching the second level of qi condensation could one unlock the first immortal skill in the qi condensation manual. Thinking of immortal skills, Meng Hao left the stone room, closing the stone door as if it were some type of jewel or treasure. He decided to use Elder Sister Shu's method. He wouldn't stand guard next to the spirit spring itself. He would just wait for some time to pass, then come back to collect the spiritual energy. Sitting there in the Immortal's cave, Meng Hao rubbed his stomach. Thinking over the recent days, and looking down at his skinny belly, he realized that he hadn't eaten any wild animals recently. Not even wild fruits. After becoming an outer sect disciple, he thought to himself, he hadn't been eating as much as when he was a servant. As long as you had enough spirit stones, you could take them to the sect's pill cultivation workshop to exchange them for fasting pills or appetite control pills. It was said that 1 drop of such a pill would prevent hunger for days. Without them, people would have to spend time worrying about finding food. After thinking about it for a while, Meng Hao decided to go out for a bit. The fresh wind blew past him into the surrounding jungle. As he walked, he pulled the copper mirror out of his bag of holding, as had become his custom. By now, he was thoroughly convinced that the treasure pavilion brother had tricked him. There was nothing unusual at all about this mirror. In more than half a month of study, he hadn't uncovered anything even slightly peculiar about it. Sadly, I only have a half of a spirit stone in my bag of holding. I bet I'll need to use it to bribe him to let me exchange it. He stretched his hand into the bag to pull out the spirit stone, feeling a bit dejected. He suddenly froze in place, lifting his head up when he noticed a flash of color off in the distance in the jungle. It wasn't moving very fast. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. Based on his experience in the past months catching wild chickens, he knew exactly what it was. Wild chicken. Without time to think about shoving the copper mirror and spirit stone back into the bag of holding, he shoved them into a pocket and leaped forward. Ever since spiritual energy had appeared in his body, Meng Hao realized that he was much more nimble than before. Despite still being somewhat frail, he now could burst forth with explosive force. Especially nowadays, after reaching the first level of qi condensation, a leap like the one he just made propelled him forward very quickly. In the space of about 10 breaths, he was able to snatch the alarmed wild chicken. He clasped it by the 2 wings so that it couldn't move about. I wonder how good old Fatty is doing recently, he said, thinking about the fat teenager as he lifted up the chicken. Maybe he would go find him and share a meal of wild game. Just as he turned, he suddenly felt something inside his robe growing hot. Moments later, the previously quiet chicken in his hand started to struggle wildly and emit miserable squawking sounds. It moved around with such energy that Meng Hao almost couldn't keep hold of it. The wild chicken struggled even fiercely, squawking with incomparable shrillness. Then, a popping sound could be heard coming from its butt, which then suddenly exploded, sending blood and gore flying in all directions. Everything happened so suddenly. Meng Hao stood there gaping. Ever since arriving on the mountain, he had caught quite a few wild chickens. But this was the first time he had seen anything like this. He looked down with shock at the dead chicken and its exploded rear. Then he looked around. Everything was still and quiet. Not even a shadow moved. What just happened? Meng Hao shivered. The wild chicken's death had been quite miserable. It must have experienced incredible pain for its but exploded. Meng Hao took in a deep breath, suppressing the anxiety he felt. The wild chicken's death had been too odd and horrific. He felt as if a cold wind was blowing down his back. Something's not right, said Meng Hao. He tossed away the dead chicken, and then pulled out the mirror and the spirit stone. He remembered that just before the strange thing had happened with the chicken, something in his robe had started to grow hot. Could it be the spirit stone? Then his eyes fell onto the copper mirror. His heart began to beat faster and a powerful radiance shone forth in his eyes. Don't tell me, or the hand holding the mirror began to tremble. He had no time to go eat with the fat teenager. Gripping the mirror, he ran as fast as possible into the jungle, trying to find another wild animal. He needed to know if the wild chicken's killer really was the mirror. He didn't have to run for very long before a wild deer appeared right in front of him. It stood there looking at him stupidly, then angrily. Meng Hao immediately shined the mirror onto it. The deer's expression changed immediately. It leaped to flee, calling out miserably, in a heart-rending fashion difficult to describe. Anyone who heard it could only imagine how miserable the creature must be. Meng Hao could clearly see the animal's flank as it leaped into the air. Before it could land, its butt exploded with a bang, its body twitching as it fell. Looking at the dead deer, then back at the mirror, an unprecedented look of excitement appeared on Meng Hao's face. What a treasure! A real treasure! It's so strange. A treasure that explodes the butts of wild animals. Even though he didn't understand it completely, he was still very excited. Regardless of why the treasure did this, he had an itching desire to go test it out on some more animals. Chapter 7: I Need Spirit Stones. As he walked, he grew more and more excited. The road he walked was filled with blood and gore. The blood and gore of scores of wild animals, whose butts had exploded violently. Bang! Another furry animal in front of him screamed shrilly as an invisible attack struck its rear end 3 times, until it exploded, sending a mist of blood spraying into the air. Boom! A foraging giant condor, not even landed on the ground yet, shrieked miserably, as if it were experiencing a nightmare. Then its butt exploded. Bang! Boom! That was a fierce, human-sized tiger that had been about to pounce on Meng Hao. In mid-air, it emitted a terrifying roar that changed into a horrific squeal, whereupon its butt blew open, showering gore and blood everywhere. Perhaps because it had so much fur, it actually exploded 5 times in succession. What a treasure! What a mighty treasure! Before he knew it, dusk had fallen, and Meng Hao's expression could not be more excited. He looked down at the copper mirror. Throughout the day, he had exploded the rear ends of over 100 animals. Fortunately, he was out in the multitudinous wild mountains, otherwise the stench of the blood and gore would be overwhelming. The mirror isn't completely effective, though. When I tried it out on that python and the fish, it didn't do anything at all. It seems it doesn't work on animals with scales. But it's still awesome. He had tested it out in many ways and had discovered that it didn't work when inside the bag of holding. It only worked when he held it. He also got a strange, excited feeling when it was at work exploding wild animals' rear ends. It also looked like the corrosion was beginning to fade, as if it had been hidden away for years and finally was able to stretch its legs. As dusk fell, Meng Hao found himself some distance out in the wild mountains. The night wind blew, and he took in a deep, excited breath. He was just getting ready to head back to the Immortal's cave. After all, these mountains were filled with wild animals. Meng Hao had even heard that demonic beasts that practiced cultivation lived out here. Despite his excitement, he also knew that it could be dangerous. He had come to this place while searching for wild animals, so the going had been slow. But on the way back, he could go much more quickly. Meng Hao sped along through the wooded mountains, and before long, a bright moon hung high in the sky. Soon, he could see that only 3 mountains lay between him and the Immortal's cave. Suddenly, he felt a hot wind on his face, accompanied by an acrid odor. He stopped, his heart thumping, then retreated a few steps. Roar! As soon as he stepped back, the air about him shook with a mighty roar, and once again the hot wind and acrid odor swept over him. There in front of him was a monkey-like creature about the size of a human. Its red eyes radiated cruelty, and its entire body was covered with thick, luxuriant fur. The fierce beast gave Meng Hao a bloodthirsty stare. Meng Hao's expression changed as he looked back at the creature. His mind reeled, as if he were about to be blown away by the creature's gaze. He could sense the creature's cultivation base fluctuating. Second level of qi condensation. Meng Hao took another step back, his expression horrified. This was no wild beast, it was a demonic beast. It must have been attracted by the reek of blood from all the slain animals. There was no time for him to think. The long-furred monkey-like demonic beast leaped into the air, and then suddenly, its entire body was covered in fire, a fire that did not singe its fur in the least. It shot toward Meng Hao. At this critical juncture, Meng Hao's expression changed. He wasn't sure if the copper mirror would be effective against the demonic beast, but there was no time for consideration. Even as it leaped into the air, he ducked to the side, pulled out the mirror, and shined it toward the demonic beast. Then a miserable scream filled the air. In mid-air, a geyser of blood shot out of the demonic beast's butt. Its face twisted in horror, its eyes no longer filled with cruelty, but rather confusion. It was as if in the beast's entire life, it had never experienced anything so painful. But it didn't retreat. Moments later, more blood exploded out. Now the confusion in its expression turned into complete astonishment. It stared in horror at the mirror held in the hands of the young man standing in front of it. It turned, covering its rear end with its claws. The fire went out, and it made to flee, but before it could go more than a handful of meters, its butt exploded again, this time, 5 explosions in succession. Its screams rang out as it ran about 30 more meters. Meng Hao felt the copper mirror trembling as if with excitement. A powerful boom rang out, shooting straight toward the demonic beast's rear end. An incomprehensible scream rang out over the wild mountains as half of the demonic beast's body exploded. A cloud of blood and gore shot up, then slowly descended to the ground. Confusion filled its face as it gasped a few last breaths, then died. Everything had happened so fast. The entire time, Meng Hao just stood there gaping. Finally, he took a breath, then looked down at the mirror, panting. Even demonic beasts can't avoid having their rear ends exploded. This mirror, in his excitement, Meng Hao felt even more awe. He put it away, then looked over at the corpse of the demonic beast, his heart thumping. The Qi Condensation Manual has an introduction to demonic beasts. It says that they have a demonic core inside their bodies which contains spiritual energy. I should be able to just eat it. He quickly walked over to the corpse. Sure enough, in the abdomen of the creature he found a pristine demonic core, about the size of a fingernail. It emitted a delicate, fragrant aroma which left him feeling extremely comfortable. Having retrieved the demonic core, Meng Hao hurried along his way. Unfortunately, demonic creatures were not common in these parts. He didn't see any more on his way back to the Immortal's cave. He felt a little disappointed. By the time he got back, it was deep into the night. He sat down cross-legged and looked at the demonic core and the copper mirror, his eyes shining. I can just eat the demonic core, but I still have the spirit condensation pill that the sect distributed. I'll take that first, then take the demonic core. His mind set, Meng Hao put the demonic core and the copper mirror down next to him, as well as the spirit stone. With the spirit stone at his side, it would allow him to absorb a little more spiritual energy. Next, he took out the spirit condensation pill and swallowed it down. As soon as it entered his body, strands of spiritual energy began to spread out slowly. Meng Hao rotated his cultivation base, quickly absorbing the power of the medicinal pill. When he opened his eyes an hour later, they glittered brightly. Taking this pill was definitely much faster than actually practicing cultivation, he thought to himself. Unfortunately, the spirit condensation pill just did not have enough energy. There wasn't anything he could do about that, though. His gaze shifted to the side and he picked up the demonic core and popped it into his mouth. As soon as it entered his body, spiritual energy far outmatching that of the spirit cultivation pill poured into him. It was almost too much to take in. He quickly rotated his cultivation base and poured the energy into it. His body began to tremble, and strands of filth were pushed out of his pores. 8 or 10 hours later, his head buzzed, and he felt as if his body would begin to float. Now, there was not a strand of spiritual energy inside him. The strand had fused to form a stream. Spiritual energy like a stream, the body excretes the mortal filth. This? Don't tell me this is the second level of qi condensation. Meng Hao opened his eyes. They shined with an indescribable expression. He looked down at his body, then cast his senses inside and took a long moment to examine himself carefully. Sure enough, he had broken through the first level of qi condensation into the second. Demonic cores really are incredibly effective. Meng Hao's eyes sparkled. He stood and strolled around the Immortal's cave, enjoying the feel of the stream-like spiritual energy circulating through his body. He was incredibly happy. I am now a second-level qi condensation immortal. Too bad demonic cores are so rare. Otherwise, I would be able to practice cultivation much more quickly. And it's all thanks to my treasured mirror. Meng Hao looked at the mirror. When he did, his body suddenly trembled, and he unconsciously rubbed his eyes. He looked even more closer, an incredulous expression filling his face. The copper mirror lay there just like before. But there was no spirit stone on top of it. Instead, there was a demonic core. This, Meng Hao's brain spun, filled with confusion. He felt as if he had lost his mind. He stared mutely at the demonic core sitting on top of the copper mirror and began to hesitate. He had placed a demonic core and a spirit stone onto the mirror. He remembered clearly. But he had eaten the demonic core already. Suddenly, he wasn't so sure. Had he eaten the demonic core? Or had he eaten the spirit stone? I couldn't have eaten the spirit stone, Meng Hao gaped for some time, then slowly picked up the demonic core. He hesitated, then put it in front of his mouth and sniffed. The smell made him certain, what he had eaten moments ago was definitely a demonic core. What's going on? There's another one? Don't tell me I was mistaken, and the demonic beast actually had 2 demonic cores in it. Meng Hao felt even more confused. He shook his head, forcing himself to clear his thoughts. He looked at the demonic core, then the copper mirror. His body began to tremble and his eyes shone with an incredible brilliance, as if he had just glimpsed 10,000 pieces of gold. It seemed as if he would drop the demonic core at any moment. Could it be the mirror absorbed the spirit stone and produced a second demonic core? His voice quavered. He originally felt that the mirror's ability to explode wild beasts was powerful enough. He had never imagined that it would have an even more profound ability. After a while, he recovered a bit, although his heart was still filled with a multitude of thoughts. Right now, he didn't have a spirit stone to test out, so his heart was filled with anxiety. He was filled with an aching desire to get one to experiment with. Spirit stones. I need spirit stones. His eye shone like a ferocious wild beast. At this moment, spirit stones were more valuable than gold in his eyes. His desire for them was even stronger than his previous desire to become an official. Spirit stones are indispensable to cultivators, especially Meng Hao. When worrying about personal gains and losses, one's heart will be filled with nervousness and anxiety. As of now, Meng Hao's desire to acquire spirit stones was stronger than anything he had ever experienced. Unfortunately, the Reliant sect was a small sect. Other than the monthly pill distribution day, there were almost no chances to get them, other than by taking them from others. There's 1 month until the next pill distribution day. Meng Hao looked at the copper mirror, and his expression grew ferocious. Moments later, the ferocity disappeared, hidden away. Right now, his cultivation base was only at the 2nd level of qi condensation. Even if he wanted to take something by force, he wouldn't be a match for anyone. Back in Yunjia County, I had no money, said Meng Hao helplessly. Now I'm an immortal, and I still have no money. In his mind, he pondered how he could get his hands on more spirit stones. Chapter 8, Zhao Wugang. It's only 1 more month, but during that month, I must fight to increase my cultivation base 1 step further. He carefully put the copper mirror back into the bag of holding. He knew that he could not let anyone know of its abilities. If he did, it would be difficult for him to keep a hold of it, and he would surely lose his life in the process. He looked down at himself, and the filth that covered him. In his excitement, he had almost forgotten about his dirty state. But now, he had calmed down quite a bit. He walked out of the Immortal's cave to the nearby stream and washed off the grime and impurities. By the time he returned, the sky was growing light. He took out the Qi condensation manual and began to study it. Upon reaching the 2nd level of Qi condensation, one can use immortal skills. Upon reaching the 5th level, one can study wind walking technique, which is an immortal skill similar to flying. Meng Hao closed his eyes, feeling thorough anticipation regarding the wind-walking technique of the 5th level of qi condensation. In that instant, he suddenly felt the temperature increase rapidly within the Immortal's cave. Then, tongues of fire appeared on his right hand. Considering that he still thought like a mortal, seeing this caused his heart and mind to feel great excitement, which in turn extinguished the flames. Meng Hao promptly calmed himself and rotated his cultivation base. Unfortunately, by the time afternoon arrived, after dozens of attempts, he still could do nothing more than produce a few sparks, whereupon the spiritual energy in his body would disperse. It's difficult to use this flame serpent art, said Meng Hao with a frown. But he had a persistent personality and would not be discouraged easily, so he practiced breathing exercises for a while before trying again. Night fell, and then dawn came again. For 2 days Meng Hao tried again and again, failing each time, until he became completely exhausted. When the spiritual energy dispersed, he would do breathing exercises, and the resolve in his eyes would grow stronger and stronger. I can't believe I can't use the flame serpent art, said Meng Hao, grinding his teeth and slapping his palm against the bag of holding. Moments later, the demonic core appeared in his hand. He knew that if he consumed the core, and the mirror really had some other fantastic properties, then later when he had enough spirit stones, he would lack an original with which to make copies. Oh well, no need to worry about such details. Worst case scenario, I go back out into the mountains to look for demonic beasts. He hesitated for a moment, then popped the demonic core into his mouth, closed his eyes, and began his breathing exercises. Spiritual energy exploded inside of him, pouring into every corner of his body. Time passed, and soon it was afternoon. Meng Hao opened his eyes, and they flashed. His cultivation base was still at the second level but was definitely much stronger. I think with 3 or maybe 5 more, I can reach the third level of chi condensation. He felt somewhat disappointed, realizing that the higher his cultivation base, the more difficult it would be to make progress. But anticipation filled his heart when he thought of the copper mirror. He raised his hand into the air and made a fist. As he raised his fist, flames appeared, congealing on his right arm and creating a small flaming serpent as long as a finger, which radiated an oppressing heat. Meng Hao felt the spiritual energy in his body instantly reduced by 30%. His face grew pale, but understanding flashed in his eyes and he smiled. He leaped out of the immortal's cave and waved his right hand. The flame serpent flew, slamming into a nearby tree. A banging sound rang out, and the entire tree was engulfed in flame, and within moments had collapsed into ashes. I have to find a chance to do this in front of Fatty. He'll definitely praise me then. He smiled broadly, feeling quite heroic. Half a month's time passed, during which Meng Hao searched the mountains for demonic beasts and trained his flame serpent art. He worked harder than he had in his secular studies, and soon was quite proficient with it, and was also able to reduce the amount of spiritual energy it used. But it still required considerable effort over the space of about 10 breaths to be able to form it. He also went into the outer sect and secretly tried the mirror out on some of the disciples. However, there was no reaction whatsoever. After a few tries, Meng Hao concluded that the copper mirror only worked on excessively furred creatures. A bit of a pity, but the mirror was still more powerful than he could have ever wished for. Unfortunately, during the half-month that passed, he never came across any demonic creatures, and his cultivation base became mostly stagnant. Thankfully, every time after he practiced the flame serpent art, his cultivation base would grow a little bit during the recovery period. However, he did not dare to engage in such practice in the wild mountains. Only in the Immortal's Cave. There are 10 more days until pill distribution day. I'm going to go further out into the mountains. Having made his decision, Meng Hao departed early in the morning, heading quickly out into the deep mountains. He didn't rest during the day, and by the time night fell, he'd forgotten how many mountain chains he'd passed through. Finally, at the foot of a black mountain, he ran into a bear-shaped demonic beast. During the battle, he used the flame serpent art and the powerful copper mirror. A series of 5 explosions were followed by a miserable, reverberating scream, whereupon the creature died in a pool of blood. He took its core, and was about to head further along the black mountain when suddenly, the hairs on his body stood on end. Some distance ahead of him had appeared 5 demonic beasts with the heads of elephants and bodies of tigers. They stared at him, eyes cold. With the mirror, he could easily handle 1 demonic beast. But 5 would be very difficult. He slowly retreated backwards, his right hand clutching the mirror tightly. Suddenly, a massive roar sounded out from the trees covering the black mountain. It grew in intensity until it was like a huge explosion seething in the air. Meng Hao's expression changed, and he ran away as fast as possible, without the slightest intention of slowing down even a bit. Fortunately, the 5 demonic beasts didn't pursue him, and he soon disappeared into the mountains. That cry sounded similar to when Uncle Shangguan called out. It seems there are a lot of demonic beasts in that black mountain, even greater demonic beasts. As he sped along, he looked back at the black mountain, more and more convinced of what a dangerous place it was. 10 days passed by quickly. With the Black Mountain as his boundary, Meng Hao ventured into the mountains but didn't come across any more demonic beasts. The bare demonic core in his bag of holding seemed more and more precious, so he didn't eat it. Pill distribution day arrived, and the sound of bells filled the air. Meng Hao left the Immortal's Cave and entered the outer sect. When he had departed a month ago, his cultivation base was the first level of chi condensation, and now it was the second. Even though he was some distance from the third level, he speculated that if the copper mirror was as effective as he imagined, in the future he would progress by leaps and bounds. As fearful as ever about suffering a loss, Meng Hao entered the pill distribution square. Many of the disciples looked at him as he entered, obviously recognizing him. His actions the previous month had caused quite a shock to the outer sect. Even though his cultivation level was low, and a month had passed, the matter had been discussed quite a bit. This time, it was not Shangguan Xiao who presided, but another middle-aged man. Like last time, he distributed a spirit cultivation pill and half a spirit stone. But there was no individual pill distribution this time. As soon as the pill and the spirit stone were in his bag of holding, and the pillars grew dark, Meng Hao left as quickly as possible, not hesitating a moment. As he left, his eye swept across the square, and he saw quite a few cultivators blocking fellow disciples to take medicinal pills and spirit stones. Elder Sister Shu's blessing still seemed to have an effect. Coupled with his quick departure, the only thing he received was a few cold stares. No one attempted to take anything from him. He breathed a sigh of relief. He was well aware that Elder Sister Shu's name could only protect him for so long. This month was fine, but in a few more months, someone would surely make a move against him. As long as the copper mirror works, in a few months, we'll see who will be snatching from whom. Eyes glittering, he lowered his head and walked a bit faster. He left the outer sect, eager to try out the copper mirror, walking as fast as possible back towards the Immortal's cave. When the cave was not far off, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, his pupils narrowing. A person had just walked out of the jungle. He wore a green robe and looked to be about 24 or 25 years of age. He had an arrogant look on his fierce face as he stood there staring coldly at Meng Hao. His cultivation base was not that of an ordinary person. It was the third level of qi condensation. The man stood there, blocking Meng Hao's way. "Greetings, Elder Brother Zhao," said Meng Hao, his expression changing as he took a few steps back. He moved his left hand behind his back, and began moving about in the air. He had seen this person before. Just about everyone in the outer sect knew Elder Brother Zhao Wugang. He was cruel and ruthless, and quite a few low-level disciples had died by his hand in the public zone. He was the kind of person to ingratiate himself to disciples above the third level, but lord it over the first and second levels. "So, you've heard of me," said Zhao Wugang coldly. "I don't need to make any more introductions. Hand over your medicinal pill and spirit stone." Others didn't dare to even touch Meng Hao, but Zhao Wugang had entered the sect years ago and knew how things worked. Elder Sister Shu often secluded herself, ignoring the lives of the people beneath her. "Elder Brother Zhao, can't you make an exception?" said Meng Hao, taking a few steps back. I'm just a simple scholar, and I just got the spirit stone and medicinal pill. Can't you give me a bit of time with them?" This person's cultivation level was greater than his by more than an entire level. Furthermore, he had never fought anyone before. His face grew pale from fear. "You call yourself a scholar?" He sneered, then laughed loudly. "Don't tell me you were a scholar before you came here. Come, recite some poetry for your elder brother. Maybe you'll lighten my mood and I won't beat you and break your legs." Elder Brother Zhao, Meng Hao was extremely nervous, and quite angry as well, but he had no choice but to hold on and try to talk some sense into the man. The sages said, "Shut up. I'll take not only your medicinal pill and spirit stone, but the Immortal's cave as well. From now on, we are fellow disciples in the outside world, but in the cave, you will be my servant. If you say even one more word, I'll help you to understand the meaning of the expression, 'Death is better than life.'" Glaring murderously, he began walking toward Meng Hao. His cultivation base had already broken through to the third level, and needed large amounts of spiritual energy. So of course he had taken a fancy to Meng Hao's Immortal's cave. However, he still feared Elder Sister Shu, so he had come up with the idea to keep him as a servant. After some time passed, Elder Sister Shu would surely forget the nobodies beneath her, and he could just kill Meng Hao. Or if he didn't kill him, he could cripple him and force him to stick around reciting poetry to show how elegant Zhao Wugang was. The Immortal's Cave belongs to elder sister Xu. How could I act as her agent? Elder brother Zhao, please don't make things so hard for me. Behind his back, strands of spiritual energy had collected in Meng Hao's right hand. He knew that he wasn't a match for Zhao Wugang, but the Immortal's Cave was just too important, and the Spirit Stone even more so. There was no way he would hand it over. Therefore, his heart filled with uncertainty and anger, he used the name of elder sister Xu. I give you some face and you ignore it, said Zhao Wugang with a snort. You're just looking for trouble. I'll definitely teach you what it means to prefer death over life. An impatient expression on his face, he raced toward Meng Hao, his outstretched hands twisting like claws. Meng Hao looked completely shocked and frightened, which Zhao Wugang liked. He enjoyed seeing such looks on the face of people weaker than him. He could just imagine Meng Hao dropping to the ground in front of him, trembling. Just when he was feeling most proud of himself, right before he reached Meng Hao's horrified expression disappeared, to be replaced with sternness. He flung his right hand out from behind his back, and a burning, finger-long flame serpent shot toward Zhao Wugang. Meng Hao's heart thumped furiously. He knew that the flame serpent art was not strong enough to kill his opponent, but he still hoped that it would at least slow him down. He could not bear to be captured, much less hand over all his possessions and become a servant. He would flee into the mountains in an instant if he could. Flame serpent art! Zhao Wugang's expression changed, and he retreated backwards. His hand slapped his bag of holding and produced a small white sword, which he threw toward the flame serpent. There was a bang, and the flame serpent disappeared. The white sword had been twisted and bent, so he kicked it aside into the jungle. Looking quite embarrassed, Zhao Wugang continued to move backwards, watching as Meng Hao fled into the mountains. He was both furious and astonished. He reached the second level of qi condensation so quickly, said Zhao Wugang furiously. Elder Sister Xu's Immortal's Cave really is effective. It seems I must kill this guy. He raced off in pursuit. After pursuing him for a bit, he found that Meng Hao was much more familiar with this part of the mountain than him. Furthermore, he ran very quickly. Zhao Wugang was having trouble catching him. You little bastard, called Zhao Wugang in a sinister voice. There's no one out here in these mountains. Do you want to die? I'm gonna finish you. Considering how quickly Meng Hao was running, he decided that it was time to use one of his more powerful techniques. He roared, and his body expanded, the hair on his body growing thick and golden-colored. Some of the hair even stuck out through his clothing. It looked as if he had transformed into something like a demonic beast. This was a technique he had picked up before joining the sect, the word-demon skill. It was a skill which could be cultivated after reaching the second level of qi condensation, but the demonic transformation was not very obvious. The body grew bigger and stronger, and more frightening. Such a skill would allow him to rampage among lower-level disciples. He could only use this skill for a limited time, but it was quite effective. His killing trump card. Now that his cultivation base had reached the third level of qi condensation, the skill was even more fully developed. Being able to grow such thick, golden fur was a pleasant surprise. Being able to shapeshift into a demonic form like this would enable him to easily shock his opponents. He brimmed with confidence, his thick, golden fur shining brightly, mighty and domineering. Fur even grew from his face. He looked exactly like a human-shaped demonic beast. You will be the first person to die under my word-demon skill. How just unfair. Chapter 9, Impatience and Frustration. Using this technique at the third level allowed Zhao Wugang to increase his strength by several degrees, as well as his speed. Grinning hideously, face full of greed, he charged toward Meng Hao, sharp claws glittering in the sunlight. He brimmed with confidence, certain that Meng Hao's fear would break him. Flee he might, but escape he could not. Run, laughed Zhao Wugang with a ferocious smile, his powerful voice reverberating through the air. You can't escape the skills of Zhao Wugang. When Zhao Wugang shapeshifted into demonic form, Meng Hao was fleeing up ahead. He saw what happened out of the corner of his eye, and a look of surprise filled his face. But then, it seemed he'd thought of something, and a different, stranger expression replaced the surprise. This demonic form looked exactly like the forms of the various beasts that had been exploded by the copper mirror. In fact, he had even more radiant fur covering his body than those other beasts had. Meng Hao looked carefully at Zhao Wugang, the strange expression still covering his face. The thick, golden fur made him look like some sort of king of beasts. When Zhao Wugang saw the look on Meng Hao's face, he felt astonished. When he had broken through to the third level of qi condensation, he had tried out the word demon form, but this was the first time he had revealed it to another person. Meng Hao's strange expression irritated him. He let out a cold harumph, and a murderous look appeared in his eyes. I think you'll probably like this copper mirror, said Meng Hao. Seeing Zhao Wugang's speed increase so much in his word demon form, he realized that he would close the distance between them rapidly. He took a few steps back and slapped the bag of holding with his right hand. Instantly, the copper mirror appeared. With the strange expression still covering his face, he shined the mirror onto Zhao Wugang in all his arrogant splendor. As soon as the mirror began to shine, Meng Hao felt it begin to emit a burning heat that he had never felt before. This was a much stronger reaction than when it had encountered other demonic beasts, as if some sort of powerful thirst had been unleashed within it. At that moment, a sort of invisible aura burst forth from the mirror and shot forward. Zhao Wugang leaped toward Meng Hao, his aura radiating murder and ferocity. Suddenly, he felt strange, as if some sort of gas had entered his body. It roiled violently within him, and from the outside it looked as if the aura was trying to claw its way out. Zhao Wugang's expression changed. He felt severe pain in his organs, which quickly rose to a critical level. Without thinking, he pushed the aura down to his dantian region, in order to force it out. The aura was powerful, and it seemed to be seeking a weak spot in his body to emerge from. When he pushed the aura down toward his dantian, it rushed directly toward his buttocks, and in an instant, exploded out with violent, gut-wrenching pain. Zhao Wugang let out an uncontrollable, blood-curdling scream. He had never made such a sound before in his life, because never before had he experienced something like this. His body began to tremble, and he glared wrathfully at Meng Hao. The murder in his bloodshot eyes grew fiercer. Elder brother Zhao, said Meng Hao, his heart thumping. This was the first time he had ever fought someone. Why don't we end things here? If you don't make things hard for me, I won't make things hard for you. A happy ending. He clamped his hand over the mirror. The sound of his opponent's scream had unsettled him. He couldn't take it. After all, this was a person, not a demonic beast. You little bastard, shouted Zhao Wugang. Today, I'm not just going to kill you, I'm going to go down the mountain, find your family and kill them too. I'll humiliate your entire clan. The pain had caused him to nearly go mad. His eyes burned, and with a roar, he pounced toward Meng Hao, sharp claws preparing to rip him to shreds. Meng Hao was just a scholar, and had never been in a fight. But he possessed courage, and hearing Zhao Wugang say such things caused murderous intent to shine in his eyes. There was no point in trying to talk reason to a person who clearly wanted to provoke him. He couldn't bear to hear the miserable screams, but hearing such threats would cause anyone to lose their temper. He took a few steps back and unflinchingly held up the mirror. As Zhao Wugang approached, he felt something roaring toward him. Once again, the terrifying aura entered his body. Considering what he had just experienced, he protected himself, sealing off the aura so it couldn't escape. But just when he was feeling confident in his success, it shot through his body, rumbling, then exploded out of his left ear. The pain was many times more severe than before, and he let out a horrible, shrill shriek that was impossible to describe. Then, his right ear exploded, showering out blood. His head felt as if it were about to split down the middle, and his face had grown pale white. Dumb with astonishment, he stared at Meng Hao. Then his face filled with monstrous savagery. "I will kill your entire family, and then eliminate your whole clan. I'll make them all feel pain like this, then let them die screaming." Enduring the pain, and also death, he leaped toward Meng Hao, filled with insane determination to kill his opponent. "I give you face and you ignore it," said Meng Hao, gaping. He had never seen the mirror explode an ear before. Looking stern, he retreated further, again shining the mirror onto Zhao Wugang. "Meng Hao!" screamed Zhao Wugang, his right ear exploding into shreds. Both ears swelled. His expression was no longer one of ferocious rage but rather astonishment and dread. He turned, faster than he had ever turned in his life, and made to flee, having lost any desire to mess with Meng Hao. But the fear in his heart caused him to tremble so violently that he couldn't even flee. Instead, he focused, and once again, summoned his desire to kill. He would inflict pain on Meng Hao's family, and also take away that damned copper mirror. However, even as he turned, the mirror, for the first time ever, flew out of Meng Hao's hands. It seemed its interest had been aroused. It flew after Zhao Wugang, attacking him multiple times. Zhao Wugang's eyes filled with desperation. It appeared as if some incredible power had entered his body. He screamed uncontrollably, unable to flee. Something tossed him into the air and his left ear, right ear, chest and legs all exploded violently. As the aura exploded out, it sent mists of blood into the air, and in the space of time it takes to breathe 10 times, Zhao Wugang's eyes grew dark, and his body slowly shifted from word-demon form back to normal. The fur disappeared, and seemingly because of this, the copper mirror lost interest and flew back to Meng Hao. Zhao Wugang's body dropped to the ground. Blood covered everything. Zhao Wugang's dead eye still shone with horror and despair. Anyone who laid eyes upon him would surely tremble. Looking at Zhao Wugang's corpse, Meng Hao sucked in a deep breath. The copper mirror flew back into his hand, whereupon his body shook. Awe and veneration filled his eyes. Seeing some wild animals explode was not a big deal, but this time it had been a living person. Seeing the blood and gore everywhere, he trembled. The stench of death on the mirror caused him to want to get rid of the mirror. He loosened his hand and tossed it to the ground. He was just a scholar, after all. The mirror had seemed interesting at first, but now it seemed incredibly gruesome, and conflicted with the Confucian ideals which Meng Hao believed in. He stood in silence for some time, feeling flustered at heart. The frustration could be seen in his eyes. In his heart, he was still a scholar from Yunjie County. He spoke the truth to people, and had never been in a fight, let alone killed anyone. That behavior was deeply rooted in his heart, and could not easily be changed. As he contemplated the situation, his heart struggled. The etiquette, happiness, kindness and justice of Confucianism, and its search for truth, demands a refraining from killing. But the sect says the strong shall prey on the weak. Now I understand the truth of that saying, but to actually put it into practice is different. Trembling, Meng Hao felt frightened even just thinking about what had happened. After a long time, he let out a long sigh and started to walk off. But having taken only a few steps, he ground his teeth, turned, and walked back to Zhao Wugang's corpse. He picked up his bag of holding, then summoned a flame serpent and placed it onto the body. The fire didn't completely eat up the corpse, so Meng Hao consumed a spirit condensation pill, then shot 3 more flame serpents down. Soon the corpse had withered up to the point where it was unrecognizable. He did some breathing exercises, gritted his teeth, then shot down 2 more flame serpents. Now, the corpse was completely ash. Glancing at the mirror on the ground, he clenched his jaw, walked over, and picked it up, gripping it firmly. Still feeling conflicted and afraid, Meng Hao left, walking back to the Immortal's cave as quickly as possible. He sat in a daze. For a long time he just sat there, before finally moving again to open Zhao Wugang's bag of holding. When he saw what was inside, his eyes glittered. The dark mood caused by his first kill suddenly changed. "This guy was so rich," he exclaimed, sucking in a breath. The bag of holding contained 8 spirit stones, 7 spirit condensing pills and a bone fragment covered with strange symbols. He looked at the bone fragment, then immediately tossed it aside. It described the word demon technique. He didn't dare to even touch it. He didn't want to turn into a word demon and then be destroyed by his own copper mirror. As he tossed the bone chip aside, he suddenly remembered the flying sword. He immediately walked out of the cave and tracked it down in the jungle. He lifted up the short white sword and returned to the cave to examine it, eyes glittering. Meng Hao couldn't think of how to reconcile the differences between the ways of immortals and the path of Confucius. He decided to stop thinking about the matter. Maybe he would understand it one day, but for now, the most important thing was to figure out a way to stay alive in the sect. Eyes filled with resolve, he took the spirit stones out and felt them. Then he pulled out the copper mirror and put it down next to him, looking at it for some time. "Elder brother Zhao provoked me," he murmured. "I had to strike back. I tried to smooth things out, but he refused. I killed someone, but I tried to be reasonable. I tried to be kind, but he rushed into death. The mirror reeks of blood. In the hands of an evildoer, it would be a tool of evil, but in my hands, it will be different. I have Confucian kindness in my heart, and this treasure is mine. It will be different." He looked down at the mirror and took a deep breath. It doesn't just explode things, and doesn't just seek blood. In the future, I will use it carefully. He muttered to himself like this for some time, then lifted his head, thinking about the other mystery of the mirror, and his hope. He ground his teeth. Success or failure? Now we'll see. If it's a success, then Meng Hao's cultivation practice will be anything but ordinary. With no more hesitation, Meng Hao pulled out the demonic core and a half-spirit stone, then placed them down onto the mirror. He waited with nervous anticipation. Enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, but absolutely nothing happened. The demonic core didn't change, the spirit stone didn't disappear. There was still only one demonic core. Meng Hao frowned. He paced around the cave for a bit before looking back at the mirror. It can't be. Last month it definitely made 2. He stared at the spirit stone on the mirror, lost in thought. After a while, he slapped the bag of holding and pulled out another half of a spirit stone, which he carefully placed down onto the mirror. Almost as soon as he put the spirit stone down, a black aura flashed across the surface of the mirror, and it seemed to turn into a lake. The 2 spirit stones sank down, and the blackness rippled, condensing onto the demonic core. And then, next to the first demonic core appeared a second. Meng Hao was stupefied. Even though he had prepared himself in heart, he was still shocked. After some time passed, he picked up the 2 demonic cores and examined them excitedly. So it's true. How profound. He began to breathe hard, and took some time before he could pull himself back together. Suddenly everything seemed possible. He took a few deep breaths, then tried out the process again. 1 stone, 2 stones, 9 stones, he only had 1 left over. In front of him were 4 full demonic cores. If you counted the original, that would be 5. The stones emitted a sweet aroma which grew thick in the air, leaving him feel intoxicated. A silly grin on his face, he realized that this was the most wealth he had ever possessed in his entire life. It was a sight none of the disciples of the outer sect had even seen. His excitement lasted until deep into the night. Clutching the demonic cores, he placed 1 onto his tongue and swallowed it down. 2 hours later, he opened his eyes and took another pill. He had never done something so extravagant before. By the time the seemingly boundless energy of the 2 demonic cores was fully dispersed in his body, dawn had arrived. His body thrummed, and gobs of filth had been excreted through his pores. When he opened his eyes, they shone brilliantly. The third level of qi condensation. Meng Hao was still not content. He looked down at the remaining 3 pills. He took another one. By the dawn the next day, he had consumed all the demonic cores. His cultivation base was just a hair's breadth away from being at the peak of the third level of qi condensation. As for the 8 spirit condensation pills, they would not be of much use to Meng Hao considering his current cultivation base. Even taking all of them at once wouldn't do much good. He suspected that it had something to do with the demonic cores. Considering that the spirit cultivation pills were regularly distributed by the sect, they shouldn't be so ineffective. A small amount won't do. Even if I took dozens, it wouldn't have much of an effect. Meng Hao closed his eyes, concentrating on the spiritual energy in his body. It was no longer a stream, it had turned into a river. It was not a massive river, but definitely larger than a stream. As it circulated through his body, it gave him a feeling of power. He could sense an astonishing amount of energy filling him. Considering the shocking level of power, Meng Hao knew that compared to yesterday, he had undergone a thorough rebirth. Before, he was a weak cultivator who anyone could push around. Now, amongst the third-level disciples who could occupy the public zone, his cultivation base was so high that it placed him as one of the most powerful. He waved his right hand excitedly and a flame serpent as long as his arm roared to life. Its heat immediately filled the immortal's cave. The fierce flame serpent, filled with awe-inspiring savagery, spit out a blast of fire. If he had encountered Zhao Wugang with this level of power, his flame serpent would have flown forth. It would at the very least have seriously injured him, if not left him dead. Chapter 10, Wang Tongfei. Toward the end of September, it grew as hot as usual. The heat refused to dissipate, instead growing more and more intense. In the lands of South Heaven, things usually began to cool by around the 11th month of the year in the southern domain in the state of Zhao. By the first month of the following year, the freezing grip of winter could be felt. One morning at dawn, Meng Hao left the immortal's cave, eyes shining, full of hope regarding the future. My cultivation base is just a hair's breadth away from the peak of the third level of qi condensation, he said, taking a deep breath. Perhaps I can't be considered powerful in the outer sect, but at least no one will pick on me. He looked off into the distance. The mountain breeze lifted his hair up as it blew past, and he suddenly appeared quite elegant. Originally a down-and-out scholar, he had entered the world of immortals. When he thought back to the events which had occurred in the preceding days, they seemed almost unreal. It's too bad I don't have enough spirit stones. And the spirit condensation pills aren't strong enough to be of any use. His excitement faded into disappointment when he thought about spirit stones. Fatty, Wang Youcai, and that other headstrong young man, Meng Hao muttered to himself. The 4 of us came to the Reliant sect together. I wonder how they are now. His body moved forward in a flash. Circulating the spiritual energy in his body, he immediately headed toward the North Mountain. The east, south, west and north mountains of the Reliant sect towered mightily into the sky, covered with pavilions carved from jade. If you looked at the mountains closely, you could see rays of dawn light seeping over their peaks, just beginning to illuminate the surroundings. White clouds wound around the peaks, concealing parts of the mountains. It really did seem like a place of immortals. If you wanted to go from the South Mountain to the North Mountain, but wanted to circumvent the outer sect, then you would have to pass along the East or West Mountain. Meng Hao walked along the path passing the East Mountain, 2 wild chickens in hand. I haven't seen Fatty in about 2 months, I wonder if he's lost any weight. Thinking about Fatty, Meng Hao smiled. Then, his eyes flickered and he stopped walking. He felt a gentle breeze from up ahead, which carried along with it a thin fog. Amidst the fog walked a young man wearing a luxurious white robe. He was clearly different than other outer sect disciples. His garment was as white as snow and his long hair flowed over his shoulders. Incredibly handsome, almost pretty, he gave off the sense of being perfect in every way, both physically and in temperament. It was as if he had been blessed by heaven, chosen by nature. His expression was cool and indifferent, as if nothing were worthy to cause him to change it. Even if the mountains crumbled in front of him, he would remain calm. The fog beneath him roiled and churned. Behind him walked two youths, who were also handsome, but when compared to the white-robed young man seemed like trash. Elder Brother Wang, we've heard that in a few years, the sect will have special training to promote disciples to the inner sect. We junior brothers would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you in advance. Yes. When Elder Brother Wang entered the sect, he was already famous. He even aroused the interest of the other three great sects. But in the end, you decided to stick with the Reliant sect. What extraordinary magnanimity! Refusal to violate the etiquette of the sect, ignoring the invitations of the outsiders, reaching the 6th level of chi condensation in these 2 years. I even heard one of the patriarchs say that the promotion training was being held just for Elder Brother Wang. That's right. Once Elder Brother Wang enters the inner sect, it won't be long before he surpasses Elder Sister Shu and Elder Brother Chen. He'll be the famous #1 disciple of the Reliant sect. Don't speak foolishly, said the man in the white robe, his voice gentle. Elder Sister Shu is a chosen, and Elder Brother Chen is wholeheartedly focused on the Tao. They are both fellow disciples whom I admire and respect. His voice was light and warm, but also manly and pleasant to the ear. This was the #1 disciple of the outer sect, Wang Tingfei. Elder Brother has achieved outstanding mastery of cultivation. With such latent talent and good nature, we junior brothers are happy to receive your instruction. Yes, Elder Brother Wang treats everyone kindly, even disciples of the 1st level of chi condensation. Everyone in the sect knows this. I truly admire you. The three of them talked, walking slowly toward Meng Hao. Elder Brother Wang, in his white robe, caught sight of the Meng Hao and nodded. He passed them, and the other two people didn't even give him a single look. As they walked off, Meng Hao glanced back. It was then that he noticed the white-robed man's feet were not on the ground. Instead, he floated along about 7 inches off the ground. Meng Hao gaped in shock. He realized that he himself couldn't even compare in any way. He was frail and swarthy, not attractive in any way. Furthermore, he carried 2 squirming chickens in his hands. So that's Elder Brother Wang Tingfei. He has the ability to float in the air, a skill which comes with the 5th level of chi condensation. He had heard rumors about Elder Brother Wang, and knew a lot about him. When Wang Tingfei had entered the sect, it had caused a big commotion in the cultivation world in the state of Jiao. No one knew the true price paid by the Reliant sect to calm the waves of commotion, or why he had decided to stay. If I looked like him, I could have placed first in the imperial examinations. I could have married the emperor's daughter. Filled with admiration, Meng Hao turned and continued on toward the North Mountain. He didn't stop the entire way, and by midday, had arrived in the wild mountains bordering the North Mountain. This was where he and Fatty had usually come to chop wood. As soon as he arrived, he heard the sounds of chopping. With a smile, he walked briskly forward, and soon caught sight of Fatty, chopping away at a tree. He was about to call out a greeting, then stopped and took a step back. You stole my wife, and my manju. I'm gonna chop you to death. I'm gonna bite you to death. Fatty hadn't lost any weight. In fact, he was a bit fatter. He looked like a round ball. His eyes were closed, and he stood there howling, surrounded by chopped-up pieces of wood. He hacked at the trees, his body twisting. Then, he dropped the axe and fell to sleep. Deep bite marks could be seen on the long handle of the axe. Meng Hao was shocked. He had never imagined that in his 2 months away, Fatty's sleepwalking behavior would become even more severe. Now it wasn't just happening at night, but during the day as well. He was hesitating as to whether or not to awaken him, when suddenly Fatty's nose twitched and he rubbed his eyes. He gazed about, eyes shining, looking as if he were about to drool. I smell wild chicken. Yeah, 2 of them. He jumped up and looked around, although he didn't see Meng Hao standing there in the jungle. Then he saw the felled trees around him. A look of gratefulness filled his eyes. Ah, Meng Hao, you're so kind, he said emotionally. You've been gone so long, but you keep coming back secretly to help me chop wood. It's been like this for almost 2 months. Meng Hao, I, Li Fugue, 1. Fatty Li Fugue's name in Chinese is Li Fugue. Li is a common family name. Fugue means rich and influential. Have never had a better friend in my whole life. Meng Hao, still standing off in the distance, heard all of this and was amazed. He looked strangely at Fatty, then coughed lightly and stepped forward. When he appeared, it seemed Fatty could sense him. He turned his head and caught sight of him, his face full of excitement. Meng Hao, you finally show your face, he said eagerly. Every time I wake up, I call out for you, but you never appear, ah. His gaze fell onto the 2 wild chickens, and his eyes grew wide. A bit later, fire surrounded the chickens, and a fragrant aroma filled the air. Meng Hao and Fatty sat together, just the same as when they had both been servants. They gobbled down the chicken. I haven't had wild chicken for 2 months, said Fatty, his mouth full of chicken. How come you haven't shown your face all this time? Since you always come to help me chop wood, why don't you bring chickens too? The joy on his face was clearly apparent as he looked at Meng Hao. It seemed that in his time in the Reliant sect, he had come to view Meng Hao as a relative. Meng Hao gave an enigmatic laugh and offered no explanation. Taking a bite of chicken, he looked at Fatty. It was then he noticed that Fatty's teeth seemed to be longer than before. How has your cultivation training been going? He asked. Have you been able to sense spiritual energy? Don't bring it up, he said with a deep sigh. I train every night, but the strange thing is, I haven't been able to sense even a tiny bit of spiritual energy. The only thing that happens is that my teeth grow. I'm worried I might bite my tongue off. He looked quite depressed. Open your mouth, Meng Hao said suddenly. Let me see your teeth. What Meng Hao saw shocked him. After swallowing a mouthful of chicken, Fatty opened his mouth to reveal a set of long teeth that glittered in the sunlight. As he examined them, Meng Hao's expression grew even stranger. He almost couldn't believe it. He could clearly sense spiritual energy fluctuating within Fatty's teeth. How is Fatty doing his training? Meng Hao thought. How could the spiritual energy be moving into his teeth? They've become spirit teeth? If he keeps training this way, they'll transform into true treasures. He shook his head in amazement. Time passed, and soon the sun was about to set. Meng Hao and Fatty chatted just as they used to in the old days. He told Fatty all about the things that had happened in the outer sect, with the exception of the copper mirror, of course. Fatty listened raptly, filled with the desire to reach the first level of chi condensation and get promoted. When it came time to leave, Meng Hao gave a spirit condensation pill to Fatty. He swallowed it, and then they parted. Fatty watched Meng Hao disappear into the jungle, looking a bit melancholy, assuring himself that he would apply himself diligently to cultivation training. He had come by route of the East Mountain, so Meng Hao decided to return by the West Mountain. This was his first time traversing the entirety of the Reliant sect. By the time dusk fell, he was walking next to a plateau which jutted out from the West Mountain. On the plateau was a massive stone tablet. The stone tablet was the color of blood, as if it had been painted with gore. Several characters were carved onto the cold stone. Low-level public zone. There were more characters off to the side, smaller. It explained that the chi condensation 4th-level disciples were prohibited from entering. Only 1st through 3rd levels could enter the public zone. Looking up, Meng Hao could see the multiple figures interlocked in combat. Many techniques were being used as they fought desperately. Blood sprayed in all directions, and miserable cries rang out. An arm was lopped off, a bag of holding snatched. As he watched, someone rushed down the mountain, screaming, followed by a huge man with a hideous grin. "Help me! Who can save you from Cow?"